What's up, everybody?
Good morning. Hey,
Looks
Jay
like
Bird.
what's going on, Bob? Looks like
living the dream, dude. Living the dream.
They just let me switch this over. Let me put the sound on, see what's going on here.
The witness is going to come back into the courtroom after testifying with that you agree.
Correct. Thank you. And obviously, we have two officers in charge in the courtroom today, exceptions for those two individuals.
Sure. All right. I'll give you the jury.
Thank you, Judge.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. They just started, so you didn't miss anything.
We missed
bringing out the jury.
Not a word. It's exciting.
But yeah, Bob, we would talk a little bit before we came on.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
What I didn't tell you is they're going so fast that they think they might be done on Wednesday, which they did not anticipate.
Wow. Really? The state?
Yeah,
both sides?
They both both sides, like done to the jury on Wednesday or Thursday, done on Wednesday. Yeah, Bob, wait till you see the defense attorney. The defense attorney talks like faster than me. She is a speed talker. I don't know if it's nervous energy, but you'll see when she goes.
Thank you.
All rise for the jury.
Good morning. You're going to see that. We really appreciate you being on time, and I hope you had a nice media-free weekend. And we're going to proceed. Prosecutor, who's the next one?
Sean Hopkins.
Yeah, Jay, I caught your short of her speed talking.
Oh, you saw it? Yeah.
Yeah. She went to the what was that school of speed reading that used to exist back in the day? You remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
State your name for the record and spell your first and last name.
Sean, SHAWN, Hopkins, HOPKINS.
Go ahead, prosecutor.
Thank you. Sir, how are you?
I'm here.
Sir, do you work for the Oxford School District?
I have been employed for the Oxford School District. I am currently on leave at this moment.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention specifically to the fall of 2021. Were you working with Oxford School District at that point?
Yes, I was.
In what role?
I was a counselor at Oxford High School.
Okay. And tell us, please, what general duties are associated with that particular role?
I managed a caseload of about 400 students. With that, I was in charge of scheduling for those students, preparing them for life after high school by helping them kind of look through different potential job opportunities, caring for social emotional wellness for students, and being kind of just a general person who would be consistent throughout their time in high school working with them.
Okay. You said you had a caseload of about 400 students?
Yes.
How many students went to Oxford High School that particular time?
There were approximately 1,800 students, divided amongst 4 counselors. There were 1,600, and then approximately 200 in an early college program as well.
So in November of 2021, approximately how long had you been employed with Oxford High School?
I started as an intern in 2014 and was hired full-time in fall of 2015.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your background, please.
I came out of college, graduated with a degree in youth ministry, worked as a youth pastor starting in 2009, and then did that and went back to school for a master's degree in counseling. I graduated with that, actually walked in December of 2014 and started working in the high school thereafter.
Okay. Now, you mentioned your role included helping students transition into secondary either education or employment, scheduling, as well as social, emotional issues.
Yes.
Would one of those roles take precedence?
It would ebb and flow depending on the time of year, but there was never anything that you did that was, this is the most important thing, because it was what student you were with at the time.
Okay.
To a senior going to college, helping them with that college application took precedence in that moment. To a student sitting in front of you with social emotional needs, that took precedence in that moment.
So did you have regular check-ins with students, or was it an as-needed basis?
It depended on what it was for. We did have regular meetings with students in regards to scheduling, but when it came to social emotional, that was more of an as-needed basis.
Did your role as a counselor involve disciplining students?
No,
Okay, who took care of that?
that would have been the dean or our administration,
Okay. In November of 2021, who was the dean?
Nick Ejack.
All right. And did you work with him a lot?
No, I didn't. He was actually new to the district that year.
Okay. So is there a reason why the counselor would be separate from the discipline of students?
The counselor's role was to be a student advocate, to remain on the side of the student through difficult situations oftentimes, to give the student somebody that they could build that trust and rapport with, where the dean would be enforcing code of conduct.
Okay. What code of conduct, what's that?
The standards that are expected to be followed by students.
Okay, so a rule, would that be fair?
That would be a part of it,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Now, in the fall of 2021, was Oxford High School in person, hybrid, or remote?
Oxford High School was in person.
Okay. Were all students and teachers wearing face masks at that point?
Yes, they were.
In the fall of 2021, what sort of issues would you face with the students' social emotional health?
Social emotional health was definitely on our radar in the fall of 2021. Coming out of COVID, coming out of time being out from school, the anxiety that was associated with that time period, we saw a lot of issues for students, whether it be anxiety, whether it be depression, and in a few cases, it was suicide attempts.
Now, that year, did you encounter any students who actually had attempted suicide?
I did,
How many?
at least 4.
Sir, are you familiar with the term suicidal ideation?
Yes, I am familiar with that term.
Could you please explain to us what that means?
Suicidal ideation
Yeah, I'm
is,
gonna object to relevance.
Judge, I believe this witness will testify that he indicated that the defendant's son was expressing signs of suicidal ideation that was expressed to the defendant.
Well, that was his belief at the time, right? So I'm gonna allow it.
Thank you. What's suicidal ideation?
suicidal ideation is looking at themes, ideas, behaviors, which could be associated with suicide. So when you take sadness, depression, anxiety, those on their own aren't necessarily suicidal. And when we look at them, we may see somebody who's not actively suicidal, that may not be expressing a date or a plan or a method, but we see themes that, if left unchecked, could be associated with potentially becoming suicidal.
Okay. Now, as your role as a counselor at Oxford High School, as you dealt with students who were expressing suicidal ideation separate from those who actually attempted suicide,
Yes,
could you put a number on how many?
dozens.
Now, you mentioned that there were 4 counselors for a school of around 1,700, 1,800 or so. How was it that each student was assigned to a counselor?
Of the students who are not in the early college program, they were divided out alphabetically amongst their counselors.
Was James Crumbley's son one of the students assigned to your caseload in November of 2021?
Yes,
Is James Crumbley in court today?
yes, he
Could
is.
you please point to him, describe something he's wearing today?
He is seated at this table wearing a suit coat with a blue tie.
Your Honor, would the record reflect identification of the defendant?
The record would reflect the in-court identification of the defendant, James Crumbley.
Sir, when is the first time that you would have interacted with James Crumbley's son?
The first time that I likely interacted with him would have been scheduling during his freshman year.
Okay, so for context, November of 2021, he was a sophomore, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so this would have been August or September of 2020?
No, when students are in 8th grade, they're scheduled at the middle school level. I may or may not have been in his classroom because it's divided out within their 8th grade classrooms. And we don't know the students at all at that point.
Okay,
I would have done scheduling with him during his freshman year, approximately February of 2021.
February 21.
Yes.
Okay,
Those meetings were done virtually and were not in depth and were only to discuss their next year's schedule.
do you remember anything about that meeting if you
I
had?
don't remember that meeting in particular, no.
Well, I'm going to show you. First of all, if you recall, when is the next time that you had any interaction with the defendant's son?
I don't recall this particular meeting, but I know that there was a phone call in spring of 2021
Okay,
from a teacher to me, and then I called into the student's classroom to meet with the student.
okay.
I do not remember that meeting.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been admitted as Exhibit 198. This is an email, May 13, 2021, 1:46 in the afternoon. Without telling us that person's name, who was that person who sent you the email?
Without telling,
Well, who does she work there at Oxford High School?
she was an English teacher at
English
Oxford
teacher,
High School.
okay. And the email is, "Hi, when you get a chance, can you call the defendant's son down and see how he's doing? He is failing my class and tries to sleep all the time. In class, thanks." That's Exhibit 198, May 13, 2021. You received this email?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And the response from you at 2:07 p.m. is, "I'll catch him before the end of the day." And then her response at 2:08 was, "Thanks, just a little worried." Okay, did you have any interaction with the defendant's son because of this email?
I have, through phone records, I called into a student's classroom and called him down to my office. I don't remember that particular meeting.
Okay. But at least your recollection that you would have had that meeting.
The evidence from everything suggests that I had that meeting.
Sure, that's fair. Did you contact either James or Jennifer Crumbley then?
I didn't know.
Okay. And why or why not?
It was a check-in, and it didn't raise to the level of concern where I would contact the parent.
Now, as a counselor with Oxford High School, did you have a sort of method or protocol for when you determine when to contact a parent?
There isn't a set, there isn't always a set level of when you do it, but when something becomes repeated or when something becomes more concerning, I am going to then involve a parent.
Okay. Are grades available to parents on a district-wide basis?
Yes, they are. They are available through a system called Power School, which is available online
Okay, and that's the system that a parent can log in daily if they would choose to.
as often as they would like.
Now, the next interaction you had with the defendant's son would be September 2021?
I did not actually have an interaction with the defendant's son. I received information about the defendant's son.
Okay, I'm showing you Exhibit 199. This is an email from a different teacher to you, September 8, 2021?
Yes.
Okay. And why don't you go ahead and read the email here that you received?
Hi, Sean. Could you please touch base with student? In his autobiography poem, he said that he feels terrible and that his family is a mistake. Unusual responses for sure.
Okay, that is September the 8th, 2021. Do you recall any interaction with the defendant's son at that point?
I do not.
Okay. Now, do you recall any meetings, check-ins, or phone calls from September to November of 2008 or 2021?
No. So to give context on this, what I did was have a conversation with the teacher to gain a little more context of what was meant by the email. And then the teacher filled me in that the student was actually joking with others in the class, and that it was not at the level of concern that she had believed when she sent the email.
Okay, so if I'm correct, then you received the email, then you made contact with the teacher who sent you the email?
Yes,
Okay, then the determination was made that no further involvement was required.
correct.
Okay. I'm going to show you this is your response. Thanks for the heads up. I'm in senior meetings throughout the day, but we'll try and catch up with him. That was to the same teacher, September 8th, 2021, 9:15.
Yes, that is correct.
And this is People's Exhibit 200. This is November the 10th, 2021. The same teacher emailed you, "Hi, Sean, the defendant's son is having a rough time right now. He might need to speak with you." Do you recall that email?
I do.
Okay. And tell us what you did when you received that email.
I checked in with the student in the hallway in between classes to just let them know that if they were having a hard time, that I was available to talk to.
Okay. And here's your response at 4:44 p.m. "I'm sorry, I was in a meeting through the end of the day. I'll catch up with them."
Yes.
So you recall that interaction with the defendant's son?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that, please.
It was in between classes. I believe the morning after I had responded to this email. And I just spoke to him briefly in passing to let him know that if he needed to talk for any reason, that I would make myself available for him.
Okay. Did you make a decision to contact a parent at that point?
I did not.
Okay. You did not contact a parent?
I did not contact a parent.
And tell us why, please.
Because I wanted to gain any information from the student and allow the student the opportunity to talk. Being sad isn't unusual, but if I had no information other than the student is sad, it's not something I would call a parent over.
And when's the next time you had any interaction with the defendant's son?
November 29th.
Right, I'm going to show you what's been admitted as People's 201. This is an email from a teacher to Mr. Ejack and Ms. Fine, and you eventually were CC'd on this email?
I was forwarded this email.
Okay.
Yes.
And the email says, "Good morning, I had a student during first hour today," the defendant's son, "who was on his phone looking at different bullets at the end of first hour today as I was walking around the room passing out their essays. I didn't get a chance to investigate it a bit further since it was the end of the hour. Now that he's on my radar, I'm also noticing some of his previous work that he's completed from earlier in the year leans a bit toward the violent side. I can bring down these things later today during my 5th hour prep if you would like them." And then it was forwarded to you at 9:34 a.m.?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And then your response was, "Thanks, Jacqueline, I'll be touching base with him as well."
Yes.
Okay, and tell us what happened with this, please.
I ended up going down to Ms. Fine's office, who was on the initial email.
So who's Ms. Fine?
She was our restorative practices coordinator
Okay.
at that time. And she called the student down to her office to chat about the email that had been sent.
Were you present for that meeting?
I was present for that meeting.
Okay, tell us about that, please.
The student came down towards the end of the second class of the day, and Ms. Fine led the meeting. I was there to be a support for the student in case it became a disciplinary issue. But it was very cordial.
We say support for the student in case it became a disciplinary issue. That's not for you to discipline, correct?
That is correct. I would be there just as somebody who's able to be a comfort to the student
Okay.
during a time where they may potentially be experiencing discipline.
Now, at that point, was everybody wearing a COVID face mask?
Yes, they were.
And in fact, had you ever interacted with the defendant's son without a COVID face mask?
No, I did not.
So you said Ms. Fine led the meeting? I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yes, Ms. Fine did lead the meeting. She had a conversation with the student about the email that was received, and led it in a way to see if the student would bring any information available based on what the email was received, where she asked him, "Were you looking at anything in class? Were you looking at, what teacher were you looking at this information in class?" to see if he would acknowledge that it was Ms. Kavina who sent the email. He did. He was compliant during that meeting. And the conversation centered around how it was not school appropriate. The student understood, or at least stated he understood, and was returned to class. A phone call was then placed to the student's mom from Ms. Fine.
Okay, and we heard that last week during the trial. That was from Ms. Fine to Jennifer Crumbley?
That is correct.
Okay. And was that a voicemail that was left?
It was left as a voicemail, yes.
Did the defendant's son indicate that he received a gun for Christmas a few days before?
No.
So what happened next?
In terms of that meeting,
Yes.
the meeting was over, he returned to class,
How long was the meeting?
5 to 10 minutes.
Now, in the realm of either discipline or your role as a counselor, what does it take to move from a check-in to a phone call home?
It can be subjective. Oftentimes it would be if there's information we feel that is necessary for parents to know. Some where it's obvious is if you feel the student may be a threat to himself, or if there's any potential that could be a possibility. If you have concerning information that the student has shared. Or it could just be simply to confirm what a student has said is true.
Okay. So that's a phone call home. What does it take to actually call the parents in for a meeting immediately?
I would have to have a high level of concern that needed parental involvement.
And when was the next time you had any interaction with the defendant's son?
November 30th.
Okay, so that would be Tuesday the next day?
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about the 30th. I'm going to show you People's Exhibit 202. This is an email on Tuesday, November 30th, 2021, 8:05 a.m. From a teacher to you, Ms. Fine. Good morning. I know Jackie emailed you guys yesterday with some concerns about the defendant's son in our first hour class. Today he's watching videos on his phone of a guy gunning down people. It looks like it's a movie scene and not security footage / real event, but definitely still concerning when taking into account some of his other behaviors. Just wanted to keep you guys updated. Do you recall receiving that email?
I do.
Do you remember when you received it?
It was sent at 8:05. I believe I saw it approximately 20 to 30 minutes later.
Okay. And what was your reaction when you received this email?
My initial reaction was frustration of a student that just had a conversation about school appropriate behavior. And I wanted to make sure that I met with him.
Okay. So this is Exhibit 203. This is from another teacher to you at 9:32 a.m. Again, Tuesday, November 30th. Here's the photo I took of this paper in case you need it, with a picture of a math assignment. Now, what happened in between the time you saw this email that was sent at 8:05 to this email sent at 9:32?
So I was on the phone with other parents at the time I received the first email. And when I was done with that phone call, at that time, Mr. Ejack actually was in my office as I was wrapping up the phone call.
Okay.
He had been presented with a picture of the math assignment from the math teacher and wanted to make sure I was involved in that
This picture?
conversation. I don't know exactly what it was. I know he was showing a picture on a cell phone.
Okay.
I would believe it was the initial one, but I do not know that for a fact. I never saw the cell phone.
That's fair.
So he wanted to involve me in a conversation with the student about the math assignment. And I wanted to talk to the student about the email that had been sent that morning. I do not know if he was on that email. Mr. Ejack was on that email about the watching the video or not.
Okay. So we talked about the email from that morning. We're referring to this email regarding
Yes.
the video.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the information I had at the time that I was making a decision to meet with the student. And Mr. Ejack had the information that there was a math assignment with something on it.
So at the time that you decided to meet with the defendant's son, you hadn't even seen this picture yet?
That is correct.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
when Mr. Ejack came and mentioned that there was something going on with the student, I made the decision that I was going to go to the math class and retrieve the student. It's less concerning oftentimes for a counselor to walk into a class than a dean, because I could be talking about 50 different things with the student.
Okay.
So it just isn't going to raise suspicion for others. So I went to the class and asked the student if he could come with me, and I grabbed the math assignment as part of it.
So you grabbed the math assignment. So it was been admitted as Exhibit 128. Now, this math assignment looks different than the one that was emailed to you. Did you receive an explanation as to why?
I didn't know there was a difference initially because for the first 30 minutes, all I had was the actual physical copy.
And that would be this in Exhibit 128?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So as I was meeting with the student in the office, I had the email about what had been sent about watching videos, and I had the copy that is currently on the screen of the math assignment. So I initially asked the student, what was it that you were watching in class? Why am I receiving an email from a teacher one day after I know you just had a conversation about what's appropriate in school and what's not? The student told me he was watching a video game on his phone. Not uncommon, also not school appropriate, especially given the context of what we had just had in the conversation.
Okay.
So we had a conversation about making that good choice and making wise choices. And then I grabbed the math assignment and I put it in between the student and I. So Mr. Ejack was actually in that meeting as well. He sat kind of off to my right. The student was across from me, across from my desk. And I asked him, okay, so we can talk about, making good choices in the classroom, but let's talk about this. And I put the assignment in between us.
And what stood out to you when you saw this?
Well, I wanted him to explain it to me, but some of the things that actually stood out to me the most were what was written on it. Because I read something like the thoughts won't stop, and I could read help me underneath it being crossed out.
Is this the part right here that I'm highlighting?
Yes.
Okay.
I read harmless act. I saw what looked like one body, and my initial concern was that this student's drawing some things that lead me to think he might hurt himself.
Okay.
So I asked him to explain what's on here, because I didn't want it to just be me interpreting what he wrote. I wanted to hear what he had to say about it. And he told me initially that it was a video game, that he liked drawing video game characters, liked that area of entertainment, and that he wanted to go into video game design. So then I told him, okay, you can tell me that, but let's explain these words. Here you write the thoughts won't stop. Here you write harmless act. And here you write, I'd have to look at it, I think it was like my life is useless or something like that, where he crossed it out.
This part that's highlighted right here?
Yeah, and I said, that doesn't sound like a video game to me.
So I
Help
think that
me?
you didn't
What
accept
about
his
help me?
explanation of the video game.
Yeah.
Not in totality, no, because I wanted to gain more context.
So did you make a decision at that point to do something?
Well, as he continued talking, he then started talking about things that were going on in his
What do you
life.
mean things that are going on?
Well, he mentioned that school's been tough during COVID, that a family member had passed recently, a family dog had died. He said a friend moved away. And as he was talking, I just kept hearing all these themes of sadness.
What was his demeanor like?
Appropriately sad.
Themes of
It
sadness.
matched what he was saying.
Okay.
And so at that point, I told him, okay, this is a lot that you've got going on, and I want to make sure that we get you help. And so I told him, when I hear all of this, what I do is I'm going to call a parent. And I asked him, is there a parent you'd rather I call? He told me mom would probably be easier to get a hold of. So I called mom first and left a voicemail. This would have been approximately 20 to 25 minutes after the meeting started.
Okay.
So at this point, I just decided that it was enough that I wanted to involve a parent.
All right. You said you called mom first and left a voicemail.
I did.
Did you also call the defendant, James Crumbley?
I did, and it was right after leaving a voicemail I'm not entirely sure if he answered or not. I think he did, but it was almost like there was just air on the other end.
Okay.
So I wasn't able to leave a message or anything. Mom then called me back a few minutes later, and we talked for, I would guess, 5 or 6 minutes. She was on speakerphone with her son for a brief part of that conversation, and I asked her to please be able to come in, that I had some concerns I wanted to go over. I texted her.
Did you specify those concerns?
Well, I texted her a picture of the math assignment. And by that time, I also then received the email that I think you put up earlier
So
of the math assignment.
by this point in time, this was 9:32 a.m. that Miss Morgan sent it. Was the defendant's son already in your office at that point?
Yes.
Okay. And then did you have a chance to look at this picture as well?
I looked briefly at it, but I was already on the phone with Mom at that point.
Okay, this is exhibit 130. This is what we refer to as the original drawing.
Okay.
And you said you were on the phone with Jennifer Crumbley at that point?
Yeah, so I emailed her then the original drawing as well.
Okay, so you sent this to the student's mother?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have a chance to look at this?
I did look at it. Most of it confirmed what I thought was under the scribble outs, and I also noticed some words were added.
Okay. What words stood out to you?
What do you mean?
When you said words were added, what did you notice?
On the one where he added words, I know he added like OHS rocks or we're all friends here, which I kind of took as just a 15-year-old writing things. It
Okay.
didn't.
So you're referring to this exhibit 128, some additional words?
Yes, he added video game this is, OHS rocks. I think I Love My Life So Much was added.
Okay.
Things that were facetious.
And that was after he was seen with this, is that correct? It was after he created this, exhibit 130?
Yes, it existed in its form as Exhibit 130 prior to the edits that I had seen on the paper.
Now, at some point, did both James and Jennifer Crumbley come to your office?
Yeah, so I ended up being on the phone with Mom for that 5 to 6 minutes. She stated she was going to try and get Dad to come to the office, and she was unable to. And so during that point, we had about 20 minutes where I was sort of just waiting. During that time, I showed the student the list of resources I was going to give to his parents.
Tell me about that, please.
It was about a 3-page list of just different mental health services in the area. On it, it gave contact information for them. It gave specialization areas for them. And it gave oftentimes insurance, if it was accepted, if they worked without insurance, anything that they would work with payment plans.
Okay.
So I wanted him to see what I would be providing his parents.
Was the defendant's son with you from the point that you brought him out of class to the point that James and Jennifer Crumbley arrived at school?
Yes.
Okay, and approximately how long was that?
It was approximately an hour and a half. So around, I want to say a little before 10, probably like 9:45, 9:50, I received another call from Mom stating that she was unable to get a hold of Dad and that she would be coming in.
Okay. Now, if I told you that we saw surveillance video that indicated you welcomed them, both James and Jennifer, in your office at 10:40 a.m., does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. Now, what was your expectations of what was to happen at the end of that meeting?
My hope was that they were going to take him and either take him to get help or even just to take him to let's have a good day. Let's have a day where we just spend time with you, where we are with you.
To take him out of school?
Yeah.
Did you believe that he could be left alone at that point?
I didn't want him left alone. I didn't want to make that decision that he was okay to be left alone. So that's why I
Why
stayed
not?
with him
What, like-
for as long as I did. until
Why
I
didn't he
had parents
insist on
there.
they take them? Yeah,
Did you express to the student or his parents that you identified suicidal ideation?
Yes, I said that the student, when I asked the student if he had a plan, if he was a threat to himself or others, the student said, his words were something to the effect of, I can see why this looks bad. I'm not going to do anything. So I had all this information, but the student was saying he wasn't going to be doing anything. So when the parents came in, I went over all of the things I had seen over my time with the student. That he expressed the sadness over a dog passing. He expressed that COVID has been hard, that a family member passed, that a friend left. He expressed an argument the night before with parents.
Did he tell you details about the argument?
No.
Did he tell you that he received the gun a few days ago?
No.
Tell us about the meeting when James and Jennifer arrived.
It was initially odd to me that they were both there because I wasn't expecting that. But not to the point where I asked anything about it, just it was unexpected. Both parents followed me back to my office. The student, that was the one time he was in there by himself, was when I went out to greet the parents and brought them back. The student and his dad sat across from me, and mom sat in a chair kind of diagonal from me. And Mr. Ejack had left once we had confirmed parents were coming, and he returned for that portion of the meeting. So really, I felt like parents were confirming what I had said without giving additional information.
Well, hang on, let me ask you about that. You say confirming without giving additional information. I want to make sure I understand what you mean by that. So first of all, you've had these kind of meetings with parents in the past?
I have.
Okay. When you say confirming, is that something that would typically happen in these meetings?
It could, but oftentimes you may gain additional information. As you know, as a school employee, I had 90 minutes.
Okay.
She's 15 years old.
So did James or Jennifer give you any additional information?
No.
Okay. So tell me what you did and what was said.
So to start off the meeting, I asked mom if she had received the phone call from the previous day and that those events were true. She said yes. I talked about how the student had expressed these different areas of sadness, that his dog had passed, yes. Family member had passed, yep. Friends left. And all of those were just confirmed.
Were there any details about the circumstances of the friend leaving and the impact on their son?
I didn't know any details about it. No.
They didn't share any with you?
No.
Okay. I'm sorry. I interrupted again. Go ahead.
It's okay. So a lot of it was, I felt like I was bringing information and they knew it, but I wasn't gaining information. So at that point, I know I handed mom.
Uh-oh.
Hello?
This happened on this happens a couple of times. This has happened where it just like
Freezes?
yeah, and
Oh.
then all of a sudden there'll be like the live view frozen. All right, the chat is confirming. That makes me feel better. That's not me. Let me try what I've tried other times. Go here, go here.
You can talk to your counselor, you have your journal, we talk. And it felt appropriate at that time, but
At that point, did he share any details about anything you had discussed?
I don't recall any additional details, no. But my concern at that point was that there wasn't any action happening.
When his wife said that they can't, did he protest that?
No.
So you said you had a concern that no action was happening, so what did you decide to do?
Well, I told them that with getting help, I said I wanted to see movement on within 48 hours, and that I'd be following up.
So if the shooting didn't occur, what was your plan?
I was going to meet with the student the next morning and see if they had had conversations about it, if they had made some plans to move towards some sort of therapy.
And if that didn't occur, what were you going to do?
I was going to call Child Protective Services.
Now, generally speaking, within Oxford High School, is it preferred to send the student home when an issue arises, or keep the student at school?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean with that.
Yeah,
So,
you understand
you
it
didn't force-
perfectly.
you
It was a
didn't call-
very
I mean, that
clear
was pretty
question.
simple.
As
Pretty-
a counselor, I can't send
pretty
a
clear
student
question.
home
Okay.
anyway.
But you didn't want him to be alone.
I didn't want him to be alone. So in this context, my thought was when parents were saying they had to return to work, I wanted to make sure the student was with people. Because my concern was his well-being and his ability to be safe and cared for.
Did James Crumbley elaborate at all on the fight they had the night before?
No.
Now, how long did tell us how the meeting ended?
Jennifer asked if they were done, which felt abrupt. And during that time, the student had also expressed interest. He wanted to go back to class. I asked Mr. Ejack if there was any, like from a discipline standpoint, is there anything you need to do? Is there any reason he can't go to class? And I was told no. So I wrote him a pass to return to his end of his third hour.
Okay. When Jennifer asked, "Are we done here?" did James protest at all?
No.
So tell us what happened as you wrote the student a pass.
I told the student that I cared about him and wanted him to know that I just wanted him to know that.
Did either James or Jennifer say that to him?
No.
Mr. Hopkins, do you have any knowledge of firearms?
And very limited.
Would you know what this firearm depicts? What kind of firearm?
A handgun.
Is that the extent of your knowledge?
Yeah.
What about this bullet here?
A bullet.
Just a bullet? And neither James nor Jennifer said anything about the firearm or the bullet?
No.
Now, you indicated that you passed on a 3-page list of resources for mental health providers.
I did.
I'm going to show you a screenshot of 137 here. In James's hand, does this appear to be that list of resources?
Objection. I would say that calls for speculation. I don't think Mr. Hopkins knows what's in Mr. Crumbley's hand.
Do you know what's in his hand?
I know that it's multiple pages of paper and I handed him a stapled 3-page piece of paper.
Okay. Did you see anything in Jennifer Crumbley's hands?
I do not. Well, a phone and something in her right hand, but I'm not sure. Maybe. I see a phone.
Now, in years as a high school counselor, how many times have you had to call a parent in and tell either mom or dad or guardian that you identified suicidal ideation in their child?
15 to 20, over a dozen.
Any of those meetings, did a parent fail to take your child home?
I can't think of any, no.
Now, you indicated this was a confirming responses from James and Jennifer Crumbley. In those other meetings, were parents sharing information?
Oftentimes, yes. Oftentimes parents would come in and want to paint a more complete picture of their student, of their situation. oftentimes, all the time, I feel parents know their kids better than I do. If all I ever did was meet with students, I might have 2 hours a year with each student.
Do you rely upon the parent for that information?
Absolutely.
I've nothing further. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, everybody, get your speed ears ready.
Good morning, Mr.
Yeah,
Hopkins.
she's going to give
Good
him the
morning.
business, I imagine.
I'm going
School
to go
absolutely
back
failed as well. They're not off
to
the
your
hook.
first interactions with Mr. Crumbley's son. I'm not going to use his name, so if for some reason the way that I'm referring to his son confuses you, just let me know. If we're using too many he's. Does that make sense?
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you. So your first interactions with Mr. Crumbley's son were in the fall of 2020.
Well, fall of 2020. No, it would have been spring of 2021.
Okay, so it would have been before the 2021 school year.
Yes.
And that was for planning his class schedule, is that correct?
That would have been the main reason that we would have met with every freshman. And then I had that email that was displayed earlier from his English teacher.
The May of 2021 email.
Yes.
And after that May of 2021 email, you didn't specifically recall having a meeting with Mr. Crumbley's son.
I don't have memory of that meeting, no.
You went back and reviewed your records and determined that there appears to have been a phone call. That you called him down to your office?
I called into his class and called him down to my office.
Okay. But you don't remember ever meeting with him?
I don't remember the meeting.
You did not contact Mr. Crumbley or his wife after that May of 2021 email?
That is correct.
So other than discussing Mr. Crumbley's son's class schedule with him, and then maybe meeting with him in May of 2021 about that email, you don't recall any additional interactions with Mr. Crumbley's son before November 10th of 2021?
That is correct.
In September of 2021, you received another email from a teacher, which was displayed, I believe it was exhibit 199, which would be an email from a teacher talking about a poem. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that he had a class assignment of writing an autobiography poem.
And he had said to that teacher, he'd made some concerning statements in that poem.
Yeah, so if I can give a little more context to this was actually a Spanish class. So the poem wouldn't have even been in English.
Okay. So he used words in Spanish?
That is my understanding after talking to the teacher.
And the Spanish teacher had concerns about the Spanish words that he used?
That is my understanding based on the email. I also followed up with the teacher and gained further context about it.
Right. And as a result of gaining further context, you were not concerned?
Because the teacher lowered the level of concern for me, yes.
So even though your response that you were going to catch up with Mr. Crumbley's son, even though that's in the email, you didn't actually meet with him because you had the conversation with the teacher?
That is correct.
Again, you didn't notify James Crumbley or his wife about the teacher's concern in September of 2021?
No, I did not.
And you didn't forward them the email?
No.
And that was because in your mind, based on the information that you had, there was nothing to be concerned about?
Well, I just gained further context from the teacher and made the decision based off of that information.
And had no concerns?
I think that you're putting those words in to make it a little more extreme. But what I would say is I gained context and made a decision based off of that.
And if you had been concerned, if you had had sufficient concern, you would have reached out to Mr. Crumbley or his wife?
If it had raised the level of concern where I felt I needed to, I would have, yes.
So then on November 10th of 2021, you received another email from a different teacher?
From the same teacher.
Oh, thank you for correcting me. It was the same teacher. She asked you to check in with Mr. Crumbley's son on November 10th.
She said he might need to speak with you.
And she said that she believed he was having a hard time?
She said he's having a rough time right now. He might need to speak with you.
The next day, you responded and indicated that you would check in with him.
Later that evening, after the school day was over, I responded, I believe.
So you obviously couldn't have met with him that day because the school day was over, correct?
She sent the email at the end of the school day, and I responded approximately 2 hours after the end of the school day.
So you couldn't have met with him that day because the school day was over. Is that fair?
He would not have been there.
So you would have met with him the next day.
Yes.
And do you believe that you did meet with him on November 11th?
Yes.
You spoke with him in the hallway.
Yes, I caught him in between classes.
You simply told him that you were available if he needed to talk.
Yes.
There was no further discussion with him at that time.
No, because the way the email was written was that he might need to speak with you. So I just wanted to let him know that there was an opening if he wanted to speak with you.
And having a rough time, like the teacher indicated in her email on November 10th, having a rough time isn't necessarily something that raises red flags. Is that fair?
I didn't have any other context as to what was going on. And I just wanted to offer a chance for the student to speak if he needed to do so.
And his response, if you recall, was something along the lines of, okay, thanks, okay. And I'm not asking you to quote him because I don't know if you remember, but it was not an uncommon response. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it was a normal response given the situation.
You did not email James Crumbley or his wife about that November 10th email, correct?
I did not email them, no.
Or the November 11th brief meeting with their son.
Correct.
You did not forward that email to Mr. Crumbley or his wife.
I did not.
So then the next interaction that you had with Mr. Crumbley's son was on November 29th of 2021, and that was a Monday, if you recall?
Yes, that would have been a Monday.
You were forwarded another email that was sent to Nicholas Ejack and Pamela Fine. Is that correct?
Yes, I was.
And this third email, this is the third email you've received from a teacher since this school year began, if you recall.
Yes, it would have been.
September of 21, November 10th of 2021, and now November 29th of 2021. The email advised that Mr. Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone at the end of class.
Could I see the email?
Yes. Exhibit
Yeah.
201.
You know what the email says? Ethan was
This is
looking
just
at bullets
the
in
forward,
class.
So it doesn't have the actual email.
You were advised that that was the concern, was that Mr. Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone.
I believe that to be true, but this email you have on the screen isn't the one that says that.
Correct. The email doesn't say it, but you were aware that that's why the teacher was concerned and
Could I
that's why
see
the
that
teacher was
email?
emailing. I don't know if that's in the email.
That email was displayed earlier, I think. It was sent to Mr. Ejack and Ms. Fine.
That was the one.
It's at
Unless
the
it's-
bottom.
oh, there we go. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is the email I was forwarded. And it just was at the end of the hour. The teacher didn't get a chance to really find out what was going on, but it just glanced at it and had seen that.
And I'll leave that up in case you need to look at it.
Thank you.
So you were aware that on November 29th of 2021, at the time you received this forwarded email, that Mr. Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone in class.
Yes, after reading this email, I was aware.
At some point, well, let me go in order. Shortly after this email, you then met with Mr. Crumbley's son and Pamela Fine.
Yes,
And you met in your office or Ms. Fine's office?
it was in Ms. Fine's office.
And you were there just as support, but Ms. Fine did most of the talking. Is that fair?
Yes, I would say that was fair.
And Ms. Fine talked to Mr. Crumbley's son about looking at bullets on his phone?
She did. She actually asked him to describe why would a teacher be contacting me right now? And the student was forthcoming in what had happened in class.
He was forthcoming. He was honest, to your knowledge,
To
right?
our knowledge, he shared what we had in the email.
He told you what class he was in looking at bullets. He said he was looking at bullets, and he even explained why he was looking at bullets, if you recall.
He said that he and mom had been at the shooting range over the weekend and he was researching what they had done.
And if you recall, Ms. Fine acknowledged that what Mr. Crumbley's son was doing may not have been appropriate, but there really didn't seem a lot of concern. Would you agree with that?
Well, the concern was that it wasn't appropriate, and that the concern was then expressed by placing a phone call home.
So the concern was the appropriateness of the behavior in class.
Yes,
And at that point, a voicemail was left for Jennifer Crumbley.
yes,
You said that, if you recall, Mr. Crumbley's son was understanding during the meeting. He didn't fight with you about it. He listened, and eventually he went back to class.
yes, I would agree with that.
Later in the day, you received an email from the same teacher who expressed that some of Mr. Crumbley's son's prior work may have been a little violent.
No, that was in the same email.
It's in the same email?
It is.
Or was it in an email sent later in the day?
No, it's in the same email from that morning. It was up on the screen. It's at the bottom of it.
The one that was originally sent to Mr. Ejack and Ms. Fine,
Yes,
that was later forwarded to you.
yes.
You didn't see any of those assignments prior to meeting with Mr. Crumbley's son.
That is correct.
If you had seen those assignments, it probably wouldn't have changed your approach to the meeting, correct? Because the approach was really more about the appropriateness of the behavior. Is that
I
fair?
mean, it's a hypothetical of what we would have done. We acted on the information we had.
And the information that you had was that he was looking at bullets in class.
Yes.
And looking at bullets is not necessarily something that is in itself concerning to you, correct?
I think you're kind of trying to put it in like a pigeonhole. We were trying to gain context of what was going on in the situation. Because a student looking at something on their phone at the end of the hour is different than a student brazenly doing it throughout the entirety of the class. But our conversation was, is this school appropriate or not?
And in fact, if you recall, your position was at the time, it wasn't necessarily concerning because he was honest about it. It seemed kind of a commonplace thing given the Oxford community and the gun culture in the Oxford community and things of that nature that you took into a factor.
We took a lot of things into a factor, including the fact that we conversed of how it was not school appropriate. And that's why a phone call was placed home.
As I just indicated, the Oxford area was and may still be a hunting community if you know.
Okay?
I'm asking.
People hunt who live at Oxford.
In 2021, you would classify it as a hunting community.
I would say that there are people who are hunting. Yes.
Activities with guns were a common hobby in 2021, if you know.
I mean, there were people who had guns as a hobby, yes.
It was common for students to be interested in guns
I'm sure there are students who are interested in guns.
and to go to the shooting range.
Yes, students would go to the shooting range.
Yes, I'm just going to object to make sure that the witness is speaking with personal knowledge. It appears counsel is asking him to give general speculation.
Well, if you know, if you know, you're not familiar with guns yourself, it sounds like. So just if you know.
Okay.
Students going to the shooting range isn't viewed as unusual or concerning in and of itself. Is that correct?
I think that you've got to have context with all of these.
Right, and I'm just asking, in and of itself, a student going to the gun range, to the shooting range, is not concerning in and of itself.
It depends on the context. Because the student weightlifting is not concerning in and of itself unless they're doing it inappropriately, right? So you're taking something that's a broad statement that can have a wide context.
And on November 29th of 2021, Mr. Crumbley's son told you and Miss Fine that he'd gone to the shooting range with his mom the weekend before.
Correct.
That in itself was not concerning to you.
He did it in a way that was appropriate.
You would agree.
That's full of shit, man.
And can you refresh my memory?
very,
How long were you in the Oxford
like
School
evasive and like
as
not.
of 2021?
He's full of shit.
7 years.
And
in that 7 years, you learned that many households had firearms in the household. Would you agree with that? If you know.
What is many? There are people
More
who
than
own
10?
guns. There are people who own guns.
Okay. And you, as a counselor at the school, you were aware of that.
Yes.
It wasn't completely unheard of.
No.
It was also relevant when looking at the situation. It was also relevant for you to note the fact that Mr. Crumbley's son was not hiding that he was looking at the bullets, or didn't hide it from you when he spoke with you and Miss Fine.
Well, he didn't lie about what had happened.
And that was important to you.
Yes.
As a result of the meeting with Miss Fine, with you and Miss Fine, Mr. Crumbley's son was not disciplined.
To my knowledge, no.
There was a phone call placed to his mother, which we've talked about. There was a voicemail left. You did not yourself call Mr. Crumbley.
I did not.
You did not forward him the emails that you received.
I did not.
You don't know if that voicemail was ever shared with Mr. Crumbley. Is that fair?
Well, we talked about it in our meeting the next day.
Okay. On the 29th, you don't know if Mr. Crumbley was ever made aware.
I would have no way of knowing that.
Right. You wouldn't know. You responded to the situation of Mr. Crumbley's son looking at bullets on November 29th on his phone with the information that you had.
I did.
And from what you knew at the time, other than the behavior being inappropriate for school, you didn't see anything else that might have been concerning.
Well, and I want to make clear, I wouldn't be the one doing discipline in this situation. So,
And I'm asking, and let me clarify, I'm just asking from a counselor's perspective. I'm not asking for discipline. You clarified that Mr. Ejack did discipline. And Ms.
okay. So could you repeat your question? please?
Yes. As a counselor, on November 29th of 2021, you didn't see anything overly concerning about what we've just talked about with looking at bullets on the phone. That the focus was more that looking at bullets on his phone was inappropriate for school.
So are you asking from a mental health standpoint, did I see anything concerning?
Not really. I don't know that you're a mental health professional. I mean, you're a school counselor and you do have some training and
Sure.
education in that. I'm not asking for you to go anywhere outside of your education and experience. Just as a high school counselor, sitting in Ms. Fine's office with the information that you had, you didn't see a bunch of red flags. We've talked about, and let me give you some, let me go over it a little bit. You've discussed that you know that there are households in Oxford that have firearms in them, right?
Yes, there are.
You know that people in Oxford hunt.
Some do, yes.
You know that students are interested in guns.
Some can be, yes.
You know that students look at bullets.
We had one student who did that in that situation, yes.
You know
Pause it,
that
Jay.
that student, Mr. Crumbley's son, was honest.
So real quick, not to jump into this for too long, but he's now realized that she's not necessarily antagonistic to him right now. What she's trying to establish is that he didn't think it was a big deal, and therefore they weren't really expressing that to James and Jennifer. Remember, James is on trial here. It's all about, at least leading up to the math test, everything is about what the parents were being told by the school. So right now she's kind of saying, well, you didn't really think it was a big deal, right? I mean, it's a hunting community, so she's not really going at him antagonistically now, which you can see, like, his demeanor changed quite a bit in terms of like the earlier questioning. All right, go ahead.
About looking at the bullets when he was asked about it.
To the extent of her knowledge, yes, he was.
He told you that he'd gone to the shooting range with his mom
Yes.
the weekend before. Yes. That those things were not concerning to you.
Taking those things in a vacuum is why we called home. That's why
And
Ms. Fine called home.
and she said, we had this meeting. We told him it's not appropriate. He understands. No need to call back unless you have questions, right?
I don't remember the exact voicemail that was left.
The voicemail was not, we need you to come to school right now.
To my memory, it was not, but again, I don't remember the exact voicemail that was left.
On November 30th of 2021, you received another email. It's this one, Exhibit 202, which was from another teacher who was talking about Mr. Crumbley's son looking at a video of a guy gunning people down. Correct?
Yes, so this teacher was a co-teacher in that same first hour class.
From the day before.
Yes,
Okay. You reviewed that email on November 30th of 2021.
I did.
You made the decision to, I think you said you didn't see it for about 20 or 30 minutes.
I didn't. I was on the phone and I actually responded to it while I was on the phone. And then upon ending that conversation, was going to go meet with the student.
And this is the fourth email that you've received about Mr. Crumbley's son since the beginning of the 2021 school year.
Yes,
The third email in 2 days.
Is it?
You would have received the
I think it's the second in 2 days.
November 29th email about the bullets, and then do you recall receiving a follow-up email later that day?
It was a confirmation of that.
Okay.
Yes, so this is the second one with additional information.
Okay. The second one on a different issue, is that fair?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
The teacher described the video as a movie scene, but not a real event.
Yeah, she said it looks like it's a movie scene and not security footage / a real event.
She expressed some concern based on, quote, some of his other behaviors.
Yeah, but definitely still concerning when taking into account some of his other behaviors. Yes.
You did not forward this email to Mr. Crumbley after you received it.
Well, no, but over an hour later, I called him into the school.
And you decided after receiving this email that you were going to meet with Mr. Crumbley's son.
Yes.
Approximately an hour after receiving this email, Mr. Ejack advised you of another report made by a teacher about Mr. Crumbley's son.
Yes, as I was about to go and call down his son, Mr. Ejack actually came into my office with information about the math assignment.
And that there were some concerning comments and markings on the math assignment.
I didn't have any context about the math assignment. I just knew there was something about it.
At that point, you hadn't seen it. You were just
I
going
had.
off of what you were being told. Is that fair?
That is fair.
So you went to Mr. Crumbley's son's classroom.
I did.
You called him out of class.
I walked to his classroom.
Yeah, when I called out, I meant like at his classroom. You went and got him.
Yes.
Okay. While you were there, you also obtained a copy of the worksheet that we've seen.
I did.
And that would have been what I call the modified worksheet. That would be the one that had the things scratched out and the words added that you identified and things like that.
Yes.
You and Mr. Crumbley's son went back to your office where Nicholas Ejack was waiting in your office, if you recall.
Yes, that is correct.
It was at that point or shortly thereafter that you called Mr. Crumbley's wife.
Approximately 20 minutes into our meeting. Yes.
So you met with Mr. Crumbley's son for about 20 minutes.
Yes.
It was during that meeting that Mr. Crumbley's son told you about his family member passing away,
He did.
about his dog passing away,
Yes.
about his friend moving away,
Yes.
talked about COVID being hard on him.
Yes.
He had a hard time with virtual school, if you remember.
He did say that. Yes.
And you asked about the drawings and the markings and the things on the assignment that you had in front of you.
Yes, I asked him to clarify what was going on in the assignment, but I also talked about the email I had received, and I had also talked about in context of the conversation we had yesterday.
So some of the meeting was about inappropriate behavior. Is that fair?
It started off with a conversation about that because I didn't know what was on the phone. So I asked him what he was watching.
Okay.
And then we talked about, look, we just had a conversation yesterday about appropriate behavior in class. This feels like the same thing that we're dealing with here. And after we had talked about that for a few minutes, I brought the math sheet out and asked him to start explaining to me what was on there.
And when the prosecutor was asking you questions, you said initially when you got that email around it would have been 8:30 when you saw the email from the teacher, initially you were frustrated. In fact, you used the word frustrated.
I was frustrated.
And
yes.
it was kind of like, we just talked about this yesterday. Does that kind of explain what you were feeling at the time?
Yes, I would say that it was, we just had a conversation about this. Why am I hearing about something similar again?
So you talked a little bit about that, and then you talked about the homework, or the math assignment or the math paper that we saw, and you asked for some more context about what was on the paper.
Well, initially I asked him to just describe what was on the paper, and he started talking about how it was a video game, that he liked designing them, like drawing them. And then I asked for him to explain the words on it, because I didn't feel those were as easily explained by simply stating, well, it's a video game.
And in fact, you said that you didn't want to give context to his words. You didn't want to assume what he meant. You wanted to hear from him what those words meant.
Yes,
And he gave context.
he did. That's when his demeanor changed from kind of being like, what do I have to say to get out of here and just not get in trouble, to he became sad.
And you used the word appropriate to describe his level of sadness based on what he was telling you.
The way he was acting matched what he was saying. It's to me, it's sad if a family dog dies or a family pet dies. It's sad if a relative dies or a friend moves away. So his demeanor matched what he was saying.
And again, in and of itself, being sad is something that you talked about, you saw an increase of after COVID in your students. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And
we did.
that was not, again, in and of itself. And I'm not asking you to, I'm not trying to trick you by asking these questions. I'm not trying to give meaning to something that isn't there. I'm asking you, based on the information that you had at the time, you felt that his sadness was an appropriate level of sadness, not overly concerning. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but the sadness itself was not necessarily overly concerning beyond wanting him to talk to someone.
Appropriate and concerning are two different things.
Okay.
When I say appropriate, I mean it matched with what he was saying. Something can be an appropriate response, but also be heavily concerning, right? Like, I don't know a good example off the top of my head, but what I'm saying is his demeanor matched with what he was saying, but to me it was concerning, which is why I called parents.
Right, exactly why you called parents. So if he had been sitting in front of you and talked about these losses and was kind of like, yeah, it's no big deal, it's not a big deal, that could also be concerning.
It would be a different type of concern,
Okay.
yes.
If he said, I lost the top to my pen and was crumbling in pieces and falling into a puddle of tears on your floor, that would be concerning, but for different reasons.
It would be memorable and
Okay.
concerning, yes.
So the losses that he experienced, you agree, I think we can all agree, were significant.
I think when taken in totality, yeah,
And he was showing you that he was sad.
yes.
He was also expressing during this meeting that he had concerns about missing class, if you recall.
He did, especially as after classes changed, which is a normal thing. He expressed that he was worried about missing his chemistry class, which was his next class after the math class. So during that time, Mr. Ejack went and retrieved his belongings and went to go get homework for his chemistry class.
And I'm going to go over that in just a second too, but if you recall, and I don't know if you pay close attention to your students' attendance, but if you recall, Mr. Crumbley's son had pretty good attendance.
He did.
He didn't miss school a lot.
No, he did not.
If you recall, his grades weren't great.
No, but he was on track for graduation. He was passing. I believe he was failing one class at the time, and it was not by much.
So he was close to passing all of his classes. One of them he was failing, but close to passing.
Yes.
So his attendance and his grades obviously were not overly concerning to you.
I wouldn't say overly concerning, but a student who cares about class and wants to, he had expressed an argument the night before and wanted to go to class, had expressed, frustration of missing school during COVID and just that entirety. So it wasn't strange at that point to have a student not want to miss class.
Right. That wasn't odd to you at all, given his history. Now, if he were somebody who missed school all the time and was failing all of his classes, he's like, I really want to be in school. I really want to do my homework. You might feel a little differently. Is that fair?
I would say it was in line based with the information I had.
Okay. And you said that after Mr. Crumbley's son expressed these concerns about missing class, that Mr. Ejack went to his, it was the first hour class to get the backpack?
It would have been in his second hour class where his belongings were, yes.
So he went, Mr. Ejack went to his second hour class to get his belongings and brought his belongings back to your office.
Yes, this would have been after we had confirmed parents were coming, probably a little after 10 a.m.
He, if you recall, began working on schoolwork, waiting for his parents to get there.
That is my recollection, yes.
Also, if you remember, while you were waiting for his parents, you also began watching some videos with him.
Yep, so he had expressed different things he wanted to do after high school. And he had expressed wanting to go into video game design. I know that when students are waiting for parents, it can be high anxiety time for them. So I wanted to try and engage him as best as I could. So we actually watched videos from the OTEC, the Technical Center campus, where they had programs that were centered around what he wanted to do. So we talked about what it would look like to do an application for them, because he was a sophomore and he would be able to apply for the next school year. And so I did that, one, to kind of just bridge that time that could be high anxiety, and two, if you have any inkling that a student may potentially be displaying any signs of suicide or suicidal ideation, getting a gauge of future plans is crucial. So I wanted to get that gauge as well.
And he did that, and he picked out some videos to watch. Is that fair? And you picked some out?
Yeah.
You also asked him during that time if he was a threat to himself or anyone else.
I asked him that earlier.
And that is part of your assessment of the situation. Is that fair?
Well, it was a question I felt needed to be asked based on what I had.
And based on your education, your experience, and your training, you know that that's an important question to ask.
In that situation, yes.
And he basically said, I know this looks bad, but I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah, it wasn't said as flippantly, but it was, he understood, like, I can see why this looks bad. I'm not going to do anything.
Okay. So although you had concerns, you also had the student in front of you reassuring you that he was not going to hurt himself or anyone else.
Based on what he told me, yes.
Suicidal ideation and homicidal
Mr.
ideation.
Crumbley and his
are
wife
one and the
arrived at
same.
approximately 10:30. I think that there's a
Facts.
Go ahead, Bob. Sorry, I paused it.
Suicidal ideation and homicidal ideation are one and the same. I mean, in the eyes of the law, we always view them as the same thing, always. You know, and like if you're looking at like big pharma in terms of, you know, I mean, there's scripts that they put out, there's medicine that they put out that will cause suicidal ideation, and typically the way that it's viewed is that's hand in hand with homicidal ideation. Point being, this guy's like trying to pigeonhole it into a situation where, in the climate that we live in, with the number of school shootings that are going on in this country, for him to be blind to that fact and just be strictly sticking to the suicidal aspect of this is complete and total bullshit. Like, this guy was so prepped by the state coming into this testimony, because Dizzy's been asking why his testimony is so drastically different from Jennifer's trial, and that's it. But the defense attorneys do an effective job here. I mean, remember, they have to be able to prove, they being the state, that James Crumbley had knowledge going into this day. Now, we all know, if you've watched any of my content with respect to Jennifer Crumbley's trial, both you and IJ, what we feel about the day of the shooting when they received the math test. To me, none of this really matters prior to. You know, it's all about the day of. But what she's establishing is that the school was not effectively letting the parents know what was going on with their kid, not in a way that would alert them that they should be on high alert as to what their kid's mental state is. That's what she's trying to establish here.
There was some time lag between them getting to the school and actually getting into your office of about 10 minutes, if you recall.
Okay, I don't know when they arrived at the school. I know when they arrived to my office.
Their son was in your office when they got there.
Yes,
Mr. Ejack came into the office after Mr. Crumbley and his wife came into your office.
yes.
Because at some point he'd left while you were sitting with Mr. Crumbley's son.
He left once we had confirmed that parents were coming.
Mr. Ejack comes back in. When Mr. Crumbley and his wife walk in, I just want to lay the room out a little bit. So there's your desk. You're on one side. On the other side was Mr. Crumbley's son.
Yes,
There was a second chair in front of your desk.
yes,
Mr. Crumbley sat in the second chair next to his son.
yes.
And then Mrs. Crumbley sat in a third chair that was available in was it behind Mr. Crumbley a little bit?
So there were two across from my desk, and then there was one that was kind of off on a corner.
Okay.
And that's where she sat.
Your office was not the size of this room. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is fair.
Okay. Fairly small.
It's not small. It's a decent sized office, but it had space where there were two seats across from me, one seat kind of on a kitty corner, a door, and then some space kind of off to what would have been my right as I was sitting in my office.
And Mr. Ejack would have been kind of off to your right. Is that fair?
Yes,
Okay. So he wasn't sitting in one of the 3 or 4 chairs with your chair. He was kind of off to the side.
that is correct.
You testified when the prosecutor was asking you questions that while you were talking with Mrs. Crumbley, that you recall Mr. Crumbley was interacting with his son.
I do.
You said that Mr. Crumbley looked at the math assignment, the modified math assignment, because that's the one that you had, that he looked at the modified math assignment with his son.
That is correct.
They looked at it together and that he showed concern for his son.
Yeah, it felt like he was interacting with his son, and that he mentioned some things that were available for his son.
And we'll talk about that in just a minute. You felt that Mr. Crumbley's interactions with his son, that he was showing the appropriate level of care and caring for him at that point in your office.
Yes, I'm a surface level. Yes.
You confirmed that Mr. Crumbley's son had gone to the shooting range the weekend before.
I did.
You confirmed that he'd had those losses. He lost a family member, his family dog, and a friend had moved away, that he experienced all those things in the year of 2021.
I also asked, and he had mentioned an argument the night before as well.
And they told you about the argument.
They confirmed that there had been a disagreement. Yes.
It's not uncommon for 15-year-olds to argue with their parents. Is that fair?
In a surface level statement, yes, that can happen.
Oh, you can't admit that. Jeez.
Mrs. Crumbley also confirmed that her son had struggled with virtual school during COVID.
She did.
And that confirms what Mr. Crumbley's son had also told you about not liking virtual school.
Yes.
You told Mr. Crumbley and his wife that, well, let me back up a little bit. You told the prosecutor that your hope was that Mr. Crumbley and his wife would take their son out of school, either get him to see someone to talk to, or to go have a really fun day.
My words to them were, I'd like him to get help as soon as possible today, if possible.
And so you expressed to them that you wanted him to get help as soon as possible today, if possible.
Yes.
And Mrs. Crumbley said, we can't do today, we have to go back to work.
Yes.
They assured you, though, or at least you felt assured, that they were going to get him help.
They were not against it, and they made it seem as if it would be something that they would be willing to do.
Okay. So you handed these 3 sheets of paper to one of them. They didn't toss it in the garbage, right?
Not in front of me, no.
Right. They didn't scoff about it and say, we're not doing this.
They took the paper.
Right. So you had no reason to believe that they weren't going to get their help, either at some point, get their son help, either some point that day or as soon as possible.
Based on the conversation, no, but that's also why I planned the follow-up meeting with the student the next day, was to ensure that there was some movement.
And you planned the follow-up meeting kind of in and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but you kind of planned that in your head, like, this is my next step.
Yes.
Okay. You didn't express that during the meeting.
No.
In the meeting, you expressed that you were going to follow up in about 48 hours.
Well, because when mom said that today wasn't an option, I said 48 hours, then I'll be following up.
Okay. So in your mind, you had some kind of timing that you were going to follow up to make sure that things were being followed through on. Obviously, we know that first check-in point didn't come. But you told them within 48 hours you wanted something done by the next morning. And based on your meeting, you didn't have any reason to think that Mr. Crumbley or his wife were not going to follow up.
I would agree.
Essentially, you wanted to ensure, and I believe that you expressed this to Mr. Crumbley and his wife, wanted to ensure that their son's situation and his sadness didn't get worse.
Right. I wanted to ensure that we had something that, if left unchecked, could get worse.
Right. So sitting in the meeting, you weren't concerned necessarily that that day, or even by the next morning, that their son was going to harm himself.
Based on what he had told me, I did not believe him to be actively harming himself. No.
Or anyone else.
Based on what he had told me, no.
She's doing a really, really good job with this guy. She really is. Because she's establishing that the school
Mr.
wasn't
Crumbley's son
making it
expressed that
seem
he wanted to
dire in
stay
that
in school.
meeting.
He did.
Right, which is like, why the fuck not? Why weren't they? It's so infuriating.
Right. But like for her purposes with this
Right.
guy, she's hitting a home run. At the end of the day, like as you and I have talked about ad nauseum, that test, I don't give a fuck what this guy's saying or what the principal or vice principal is saying. I'm taking my kid out of school as soon as I see that test. And have they asked the question, how did Ethan get his hands on the test to modify it again? Like, how does he get that test handed back to him so that he can scratch shit out on it? And then that's what gets presented to the parents. I know that I know at least Jennifer saw the full test without anything scratched out. In what circumstance is Ethan handed that test back to the extent where he can sit down and scribble shit out?
Great question.
I just like, has anyone heard the answer to that anywhere? Let me know in the chat.
Yeah, throw up in the chat and hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, folks.
He wanted to stay in school for some of the reasons we've discussed. He didn't like virtual school. He wanted to make sure he could stay up with school. He didn't want to miss class. These are some of the reasons that he gave you.
Yes, those were some of the reasons. He really just said that I struggled with virtual school. I want to make sure I'm staying on top of what I have to do.
And that wasn't concerning to you, that he wanted to stay in school.
No.
Obviously, it's not concerning, right?
In that situation, no, it's not, but given the context of what I was hoping, you take the kid's desires into consideration, but at the end of the day, you want a team making that decision.
And if you recall, you had just had 2 virtual days of school, I think the week before.
Yes, leading up to Thanksgiving, we did have days that were virtual.
And we talked about this a little while ago. To your knowledge, if you recall, and if you don't, just please tell me, he'd only missed 1 day of school that school year.
I know he had good attendance. I don't remember the exact days.
With Mrs. Crumbley expressing that she and Mr. Crumbley had to return to work that day, and Mr. Crumbley's son expressing a desire to stay in school, you felt that it was okay for Mr. Crumbley's son to remain in school.
I felt that I was not given full options at that point, because really what I was left trying to decide between was I have parents saying they have to return to work. I have a student that I don't want left alone. And so that's when I asked Mr. Ejack, is there anything from a discipline standpoint? Is there any reason he can't stay in school? Is there anything you need to do? And then I made the decision, I made a judgment call based on what I had, is I didn't want a student potentially home alone.
So based on the information that you had, you decided that it was okay for him to remain in school.
I decided that that was the best decision I thought I could make on the information.
Okay.
Let's get to the backpack.
Based
Let's
on
get
that
to
meeting,
how no one opened
Mr.
the
Crumbley's
backpack.
son, to your knowledge, was not contemplating suicide. You said that he had suicidal ideations, but that's different than being actively suicidal.
It is. The student stated that he was not actively suicidal.
You knew that he had been to the gun range with his mom the weekend prior.
Yes,
You knew at a minimum that he had access to a firearm the weekend before because he went to the gun range.
I knew that he had been to a gun range and had used a firearm at a gun range, yes.
You did not ask him on November 30th of 2021 if he had access to a firearm.
I did not.
You had no reason to look into whether or not he had access to a firearm. Would you agree with that? Based on the information that you had.
It's easy to go in hindsight on a lot of things. Based on what my concerns were, I was concerned about student well-being.
And again, you said it's easy to go in hindsight. So we know what happened within a couple hours of this meeting. We all in this courtroom know what happened. It's easy for us to look back and say that different decisions could have been made, right?
I made the decisions I made based on the information I had
At the time.
at the time.
You don't have the benefit of hindsight at 10:40 or 10:50 a.m. on November 30th of 2021. Is that fair?
I had 90 minutes of information.
Well,
You suggested that his parents find a therapist for him to talk to or evaluate him.
I did.
You have had experience with parents who have refused to provide mental health treatment to their child. Is that accurate? Do you recall that?
Off the top of my head, I'm not recalling a specific instance of that.
If it occurred, do you remember testifying previously about that?
I don't know.
Okay. Would reviewing your testimony on that help to refresh your recollection?
If we want to bring it up, sure.
May I approach, Your Honor? Sure. Thank you.
If you would like to read the highlighted portions, Mr. Hopkins, thank you.
You can just read that to yourself and let us know if it refreshes your recollection, all right?
Thank you, Your Honor.
no, it's more than that, David. I disagree with you. I have kids, 4 kids. in
Yeah, so
elementary
I
school.
had asked.
It's more than just teaching. Our kids are in those schools for 7 to 8 hours a day. If it was just teaching, then why would they have active shooter drills? It's more than that. They're school counselors. It's not just teaching, man. Like, the parents are definitely, in my eyes, the most culpable, but the school is not getting a pass on this at all. Not in my estimation.
Like, if it's occurred, and I say it's not overly common, but I'm sure it does happen. But I'm giving a for instance of what we would do in that type of situation if it were to happen.
May I approach, Your Honor? Thank you. So reviewing, based on what you just said, reviewing the transcript has helped to refresh your recollection.
What I'm stating in the transcript is in a situation where that could happen, that what we would do is involve CPS and make sure that the student is receiving ordinary care.
In fact, the question was,
You told the jury what CPS is.
Child Protective Services would be involved if that situation were to occur.
in fact, the question was, thank you, okay. Had you ever dealt with a kid at school who you felt needed psychiatric care and yet the parents didn't provide it in some fashion or another? Your answer was yes, that had occurred.
And then I go on to explain what would happen in that type of situation.
Right. You said it's not overly common. It does happen. If it did happen, this is what we would do. Correct?
Correct.
And I know I've asked this a couple of times, but you didn't have any reason to believe on November 30th of 2021 that James Crumbley or his wife were not going to follow through and obtain a therapist for their child to talk to.
I didn't have enough time to know if that would happen or not. Given our context of our conversation, no, I didn't have reason to believe that at that time.
If you recall, the meeting with Mr. Crumbley and his wife and their son concluded at approximately 10:50 in the morning.
That sounds about right, yes.
Their son left the room first, if you recall, and went back to class.
Yes,
The shooting occurred began at approximately 12:51 p.m. that day. After you heard that there was a shooter at the school, you did not immediately suspect that it was Mr. Crumbley's son, if you remember.
I did not.
In fact, you didn't suspect that it was Mr. Crumbley's son until you looked into his attendance after the shooting.
Correct.
This is also after Mr. Crumbley's son had already been arrested.
Quite a bit after, yes.
I'm going to talk about just a few things. Just go back to your direct testimony with the prosecutor.
Yeah, and David, they have school
So that
resource
calling a parent
officers who are
in
cops
is a high level
in
of
every
concern.
school in this country.
Yes,
And that could be a concern for appropriate behavior.
it could be, yes.
It could be a concern for the student's well-being.
It could be.
It could be a concern that the student needs immediate care or help.
Yes,
It could be for any number of reasons. A high level of concern is dependent on the situation. Is that fair?
yes, I would agree.
You're concerned with going to Mr. Crumbley's son's class on November 30th of 2021 is you specifically mentioned that you went because it doesn't basically raise concern or red flags if a counselor goes down to get a student out of class.
Yes, that is true. And I had very little information at that point as to what was going on. So I wanted to make sure to do it. And I knew that the dean wanted me involved in the conversation. So I knew that student support was at least a potential plan at that point.
When you were discussing, you said that you told Mr. Crumbley's son while you were meeting with him before his parents got there that you wanted his parents to get him help. Do you remember discussing that with the prosecution?
I do.
At that time, Mr. Crumbley's son didn't say, "Thank goodness, I've been begging my parents for help and they haven't given it to me."
I'm not sure many students would.
He didn't say, "I'm glad you're going to ask them because I've asked them and they didn't listen."
He did not say that, no.
He didn't say, I really need this and I'm really glad that you're doing this for me."
He did not.
He didn't say any of that.
No, which also would not be, it's not uncommon for students to not have a big response to something like that.
If he had said any of those things, obviously your reaction would be different when Mr. Crumbley and his wife got to the school.
It would be different information that I did not have, yes.
And when Mr. Crumbley and his wife were at the school, they also didn't say anything about, or Mr. Crumbley didn't say anything specifically about, wow, son, you really did need some help. You've been asking me for it, right?
No.
The discussion was simply looking at the math assignment, the modified math assignment, and then Mr. Crumbley expressing to his son, you know you have people to talk to, right?
That was a piece of it over the 10 minutes, yes.
That they've talked. Mr. Crumbley and his son have spoken.
Yep, he did say that they talked.
When discussing the impact of Mr. Crumbley's son's friend leaving, you don't know that Mr. Crumbley's son had ever expressed how significant that impact was on him. Is that fair? Until sitting in your office.
I had very little context, even when he was in my office, over what that was. All I knew is that a friend had left recently and moved, and that was hard.
You indicated on your direct testimony with Mr. Keese that Mr. Crumbley mentioned you have people you can talk to, we talk, and then mentioned something, your testimony was that his son mentioned something about a journal, or I'm sorry, that Mr. Crumbley mentioned something about a journal.
Mr. Crumbley's statement to my recollection was, you have your counselor, you have your journal, we talk.
Mr. Crumbley didn't say your journal, you know, the one that's in your backpack.
No.
He didn't say the one that you always keep with you.
No.
He didn't say a color.
No.
He didn't describe it at all.
No.
So to your knowledge, based on that conversation, you can't say that Mr. Crumbley's son knew what his son's journal would look like if he had a journal, based on that conversation.
No, I had no knowledge beyond that there was an existence of some sort of journal.
One moment, you're on.
Sure.
Yeah, me too. My response is our school district, for instance, if that math test was seen, they're shutting the school down. They're sending the students home. That's what they do. That's all they have to do. Period.
Mr. Hopkins, you made decisions on November 30th of 2021 based on your education, your training, and your experience, correct?
That was a piece of it.
Also based on the information that you had in front of you,
That was a majority of it.
which included 4 emails from teachers in approximately 2 months regarding Mr. Crumbley's son,
That was a part of it, yes.
concerns that those teachers had raised,
Yes, that was a part of it.
much of which you did not share with Mr. Crumbley prior to that November 30th meeting. Is that fair?
Correct. It was shared during the meeting.
Based on all of these things, you did not believe that Mr. Crumbley's son was an immediate danger to himself,
I did not believe that, no,
nor did you believe that he was a danger to anyone else.
based on the information I had. No.
I have no further questions.
Read that.
Thank you. Mr. Hopkins, it appears that information and context would be important to you in these kinds of meetings.
Yes, it would.
Okay. Now, did James Crumbley tell you that November 30th wasn't the first time that his son asked for help?
No,
Did James Crumbley tell you that his son asked for help in April of 2021?
no,
Did James Crumbley tell you that
Thanks, Mika.
despite that, never once was an appointment with a medical health provider set up?
no,
Did James Crumbley ever tell you that as early as June of 2021, his son had obtained his own firearm?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that his son had been begging for a 9mm firearm?
no,
Did James Crumbley tell you that his son actually sent him a screenshot of a 9mm for sale a few weeks before the meeting?
no,
Did James Crumbley tell you that his son actually obtained a 9mm just 4 days before this meeting?
no,
Did James Crumbley tell you that the 9mm he obtained looked identical to the 9mm that he drew right here on this picture?
no,
Did James Crumbley tell you that he worked for DoorDash, he hadn't begun work that day, and he could have taken the son home?
no,
Did he tell you that when his son was talking about his friend leaving, it was actually his only friend?
no,
So you took what you learned from the defendant's son, you described those losses he felt as significant,
I did.
and that's without knowing all that information?
Yes,
You mentioned that you would hope that a decision about a student would be made by a team.
I did.
Who's on the team?
The student, the parents, and any caring adult at the school.
And did either James or Jennifer Crumbley share any information with you?
I did not.
Mr. Hopkins, did you ask any of those questions
Objection,
after
Your
you
Honor,
saw the math
speculation.
test?
She
Come on,
asked the
man.
same question on cross.
Did you
Fuck
ask-
out of here.
She asked,
Serious?
what would you have done? Talking about calling CPS and such.
I know, actually, that was related to if they had,
She asked if they had not obtained treatment for their son
yes,
by the following day or within 48 hours.
if they had refused, actually, if they had refused to obtain mental health treatment, what would he have done? Not,
I'll rephrase, Judge, that's fine. Mr. Hopkins, you testified earlier that your plan was to call Child Protective Services within 48 hours.
Yes,
And that's based upon just the information that you learned from the defendant's son.
it is.
Would this meeting have ended differently had you known all the other information that we just went through?
objection, Your Honor, speculation.
I think it does call for speculation.
I believe he can offer a definitive answer here, Judge.
A definitive answer about what would have happened if they had not contacted a therapist. Is that what you mean?
No, Your Honor, he's asking about a definitive answer for what Mr. Hopkins would have done if there had been additional information. And Your Honor, can we approach, can we approach, please?
Okay. Can you turn off the mic?
All right, we're a little behind, so I can speed it up here.
If you had asked, thank you, Mr. Hopkins, you were asked on cross-examination that you didn't ask the shooter on November 30th if he had access to a gun. Do you remember that?
I do.
And your response was what?
I did not.
Okay, and did you have reason to ask him about that?
Yeah, the math test.
At that time, I didn't feel I did.
And
Bullshit.
you were asked about the shooter's recitation of what happened at the shooting range with his mother.
Are you stating I asked that?
No, you were asked that.
Oh, by Cross.
Okay, so you learned on November the 29th and November the 30th that the defendant's son went to a shooting range with his mother that prior weekend.
I did.
Did James Crumbley tell you that the shooter actually shot his new gun?
No.
Thank you.
I have nothing further.
You can step down and your excuse. You guys need a break.
Thank you, Judge.
Alright, so about a 10-minute break.
All right, for the jury.
All right, so they're on a 10-minute break. I want to just pull something up here that what pisses me off so much about this, and it's we talk about it ad nauseum, but like, here's why this is so pisses me off so much, and you too, I'm sure, Bob, as someone who has kids in school right now. So anyone in that fucking school that saw that piece of paper, were they not aware of all this shit? This is since Columbine, the amount of fucking school shootings with injured and killed people. Like, how could anyone?
600.
Virginia Tech,
600.
like, look at all these. How could like anyone who saw that test and be like, oh, well, I thought it was suicidal ideation. Oh, I only saw him for 90 minutes. I don't care if you saw him for a second. The second you see that fucking test, are we like what? This is the society. This is not pre-Columbine. How could anyone in this fucking school think all these be like, all right, we gotta fucking stop, take this kid, check it. There has to be some protocol. Check his shit, get him out of the school, check his backpack, do something. The option was not to do nothing. And I agree, of course, the fucking parents, hold responsibility. But how could anyone in this school just be like, this is cool, we're just gonna let them, and I'll let you go about it. It's just
dude, look, you're absolutely right. And look, I've been very clear. The parents are the first line of defense here. The parents are absolutely the most culpable in this situation. The school, however, is a very, very close second. Okay, there's zero chances this could. Like I said, our school different. If they see anything even remotely close to this, they shut the whole school down. We get an email, we're sending the kids home. There's a credible threat, and then law enforcement does an investigation. Period, which needs to be done in every single situation. If you have kids in school, and I don't give a shit how shitty your school district is, this should be your expectation as to what's going to happen, because they are charged. And I was having a little bit of a debate with David there. Look, man, that is not the world we live in anymore. We're just sending our kids off to school to get taught. Unfortunately, I wish very, very much that was the society we lived in. That's not it. So, look, and I've said it before, me as a parent, unfortunately, we don't have to get licensed to be a parent. You can just get somebody pregnant and then you're a parent without any kind of training whatsoever, without any kind of parental education whatsoever. That's our reality in our society. If I had seen that test in my, in my kid's handwriting and it was handed to me, no one would have been able to say anything to me that I wouldn't have pulled my kid out of school immediately. Like it wouldn't have mattered what the school was saying to me, but that's me, and every parent, I guess, doesn't do that. To me, when I hear anybody say, well, if I would have been handed that, I wouldn't really thought much of it. I'll keep my thoughts to myself as to my opinion on that person's parenting skills. But, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm handed that thing, my kid is done in school for the day and maybe for the year. It depends, but I'm taking my kid out. I'm having a long, long conversation with my child, and that's it. Like, there is no other, like, whatever the school would have said, the school wouldn't have given me any pushback at all. So, I mean, ultimately, that's why James Crumbley is going to be found guilty on this, because of that test. Like that says everything, but like, in terms of just looking at the school, and it's easy to, like, this was a good opportunity to kind of pick and poke at the school and their failures, because they failed the children of the school. We're talking about two different things. We're talking about the victims, and that was the school's responsibility. Okay. Ethan was James and Jennifer's responsibility. So we have responsibilities for two different things: the safety of the students in the school, with dude, if my kid would have been one of those kids, I'd be beyond outraged. Obviously, I mean, like, that failure by everybody in that room, not just Ethan and his parents, I mean, but in terms of the school and what their responsibility is in protecting those kids, when they see that, and for to like no one looking in the backpack to me is obscene. Now, if y'all don't understand what there is a lessened expectation of privacy for any student when they walk foot in any school these days. This isn't like you have to get a warrant. They can look in lockers, they can look in backpacks. And you know who has zero issues with any kind of constitutionality in terms of looking in the backpack? His parents. I mean, like if I'm the state, I'm arguing hard as to the fact that James certainly knew that he had a gun. Okay. Jennifer certainly knew he had a gun. Why aren't they grabbing that backpack and unzipping it at that moment as soon as they see that test exists? And why isn't anybody asking the question? Like the counselor's biggest failure to me when he's going through the test with Ethan before the parents get there, why isn't he asking the questions? Well, I hear what you're saying to me about why you drew what you did, but can you explain to me in a way that I understand why you decided to try to scratch out, help me? I can't, the thoughts won't stop. Like, why did you scratch those things out? Because that's extremely telling. If those aren't an issue for you, why are you trying to hide them from not just me, but from anybody else that's going to see the test? Why did you feel that, you know what I mean? Like that question would have answered that counselor's whatever he had going on in his mind, thinking was going on. And suicidal ideation and him not like wanting the kid to be alone is legitimate. But as I've seen in the chat by multiple people, the guy's a DoorDasher. You stick your kid in the car with you and he makes the deliveries with you. The kid didn't have to be alone, and frankly, whatever the case may be, that kid just cannot stay in the school. Not on that day.
I just feel like that test and anything in any school where there's like a gun and it's showing shooting people, whatever, that should be like saying bomb in an airport. You don't have an option. There should be
100%.
protocol that, all right, we're checking the kid's shit. He has to leave for the day. Like you said, Bob, with your school, like lockdown, law enforcement investigation, like it shouldn't be black. It shouldn't be gray. That should be
there's no gray area.
There's some sort of gun on a piece of paper about shooting people. That's it. We're shutting this shit down. That's the problem. Like, hopefully going forward with this trial, parents will think about it. I mean, the school doesn't give a shit because they're not getting, but maybe a person who's a counselor thinks, I don't want to be testify in a fucking thing. I am gonna shut this shit down because because I mean, probably they're the same as me, Bob. Every time I get a notification, and probably a bunch of parents who are in the United States for the very least, when you get a notification from your school, you're like, oh, is this the one that there's a shooting? Because there hasn't been one for like a massive one for a little bit, but we all know there's another one coming. We just know it and we just accept it, and it's just
yeah. And look, what I'm trying to tell you guys is legally, in terms of searching the backpack, students have a lessened expectation of privacy on school grounds, period. Like that would not have been an issue. Like who's going to be complaining had they found the gun on a search? I mean, if that becomes an issue, if Ethan is then charged after the fact for bringing a weapon onto school grounds and they charge him for that, but the shooting doesn't matter, who gives a shit? You know what I mean? Who cares? I mean, at the end of the day, and again, remember, the parents, absolutely, there's nothing prohibiting them. There's no law, no constitutional provisions stopping the parents from looking in their kid's backpack. And they knew, they had direct knowledge of the gun that was purchased days before. You know what I'm saying? Like there is no, I mean, the expectation of privacy issue doesn't relate to the parents at all. They absolutely should have been looking in there. Look, again, at the end of the day, I'll be stunned if he's not found guilty, and they're going to be putting in more, he's the one who bought the gun, I mean,
brought him there. One, that's what came out. He brought him there, bought him the gun. He goes home. He takes a picture. The son goes home, takes a picture of it, posts it to Instagram. The mom went into the shooting range. Like, they both know they bought him the gun. This was his gift. This was for him. This wasn't 100%. For them when he went and bought that. Like, how you have to, like I said before, if you bought them the gun and then you go and see that fucking test, how could you not be guilty? Like, You knew he had it. It's just
Dude, and then you see the test. Like, to me, the test is everything. The test changes the entire the analysis of this entire case. If the test doesn't exist in this world, if that didn't happen that day, the day of the shootings, I probably have a very different opinion on this. At that point, I'm far more critical of the school and its lack of information to the parents about what's going on with their kid. Because it sounds like, he had a few other issues. Really, the only thing that ever came of it was the phone call wherein, which I would have loved to have heard what they said exactly. I don't know why that hasn't been played. They must not have it.
the voicemail or
Yeah, the voicemail about
from the
bullets when he was searching for the.
I made a video. That's my video.
Oh
that
yeah,
I made.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that because like that particular circumstance seems to be the only time that the parents are made aware of what's going on in school. And again, remember, like our kids, frankly, are in the school and awake for more hours in a day than they're with us. So there is a responsibility on the school. That's why they have school counselors. That's why they have school psychologists. That's I mean, those things we can't act like that those things don't exist as resources in a school. And I'm just not buying that. We can't put that kind of impetus on the schools, because yeah, we can. That is absolutely my expectation with respect to the schools. And look, I mean, the reality is that there are horrible, horrible schools and school districts in this country. There's no question about it. For whatever reason, people don't feel that it's important that we fund our schools properly so that we can get qualified people in there. And, we're paying the price for it now. But this thing, in hindsight is 2020. And I do feel bad for that guy. That I'm sure that guy beats himself up every single day. I mean, like in reality, not on the stand, not when he's, got an expectation to protect the school's interests in terms of liability, but personally, that guy is a tortured soul. So, I mean, and that's every teacher that we've seen. When we had the first witness on, when I was still with you on Thursday, I mean, devastating, man. I mean, that has changed the arc of that woman's life forever. Everybody that's involved in any of these school shootings, their lives are forever changed, and not in a good way, and so I have, I have sympathy for that guy. That does not exonerate him from being a failure in what I feel that his role was, because again, at the end of the day, we're relying on these people as parents, that they're doing everything in their power, everything that they have at their disposal to keep our kids safe. And it's a tough gig. There's no question about it, man.
Yeah, plus
Teachers did not.
He
Go
was
ahead,
responsible for 400. There were 1,600 kids, and he was responsible for something like 1,400. Like it ain't easy. But this is Bob. Here's the voicemail. If you guys check out my channel, I made a like a kind of clips. Nothing about the shooting itself, but it's like a 15-minute video just about like what they've been presented to date. Against the state, against James. And here comes the voicemail that I'm going to share. That this is the day before the shooting, folks. The day before.
And I'm here with Mr. Hopkins, who's Ethan's counselor. I was just calling to let you know that we just spoke with Ethan, had a really nice conversation. One of the teachers had sent an email to the office just that she was concerned because Ethan, when she was walking around the room checking assignments, that he was on his phone looking at bullets and that sort of thing. So she just wanted us to have a conversation. We did. He said he had been to the shooting range with you this weekend, and we were like, yep. Guns are a hobby for a lot of people, and shooting ranges, and that's perfectly normal. And that we just wanted to make sure I had a conversation with him about the things he searches at school, and things versus searching at home. Like Mr. Hopkins gave a great example of like if a teacher makes beer at home, perfectly normal and healthy, but can't be using searches for making beer at school. So we had a conversation. He was great. He's like, yeah, I get it. So I just wanted to let you know that we did have that conversation with him, and I don't know, about 5 minutes, and he went back to class. All right, if you have any questions, you can give me a call. Otherwise, it'll be a great holiday. Thanks. Bye-bye.
What I didn't know was apparently, which came out today, was let me just go back to apparently today they're talking about he was looking at school shootings videos on his today they were talking about the day of the shooting. They saw, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, he was looking at school shooting videos of people shooting people the day of. Like, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know that either.
So Bob, while we're waiting here, how was your trip?
It was awesome. It was awesome. We ended up, I went to Othram, the DNA lab, who does amazing work. They're the ones currently, I think they're the most state-of-the-art lab in the country, and they're breaking cases. They're identifying John and Jane Does from 30, 40, 50 years ago. The work they do is unbelievable. It was really cool, man. It was really like an enlightening kind of field trip for me. So I had a lot of fun. It was short, in and out, but we spent the day in there, and they had various speakers come in, and they gave us a tour of the labs, and it was really, really cool, man. It was
That's awesome.
they do amazing work. They really do. And they catch shit because they're a for-profit, but they are moving the needle in terms of the technology. You know what I mean? They reinvest money that they make into the business in order to further the, and to further the science, man, which is obviously a huge tool for law enforcement, and obviously as defense attorney, I was asking some questions about expectation of privacy and DNA and, and how that tool can be used by law enforcement. And, there's interesting.
People first, James Crumbley, case number 222799989FH.
Thank you, Marquise, on behalf of people.
Yeah, it was cool, man.
Good morning, Your Honor. Mario
Thanks.
Lehman on behalf of Mr. Crumbley, who is standing to my left. Yes, Your Honor.
Judge.
And by the way, real quick, because I see a lot of comments about schooling the school civilly. They did, and it was dismissed, guys. For folks who don't know, they tried to sue the school, and the cases were dismissed.
Mr. Nick Ejack.
Oh, the other guy in the meeting, huh? And while we're waiting, thanks everyone so much for being here. If you're not subscribed to Bob channels and you're from mine, subscribe, vice versa.
All rise for the jury.
This one is the one on the back. Is there something on the back?
Who they putting on, Jay?
I think the other guy, Ejack, the other guy that was in that meeting. I guess I don't know if he's the
The VP.
principal.
I think he's the vice principal.
What's the next one?
Nick Ejack.
Yeah, meow. They can appeal it. The problem is that I'm sure it was dismissed because of governmental immunity.
One thing I hadn't thought about before, if they do, like, say there's a judgment against the school, who pays for that? The taxpayers, right? I mean,
Of course.
so like, who are we?
Yeah, I mean that's true of any suit against the government. Ultimately, we're the ones funding all of it.
Nicholas, last name Ejack, Ejack.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. In the year of 2021, where did you work?
Oxford High School.
Okay. And what role did you work there?
I was the dean of students.
Could you keep your voice nice and loud?
Sure. I was the dean of students.
Okay. And tell us, please, what does the dean of students do?
So the Dean of Students is primarily responsible for student code of conduct, so behavior and discipline, overseeing the attendance of the school, academic intervention, behavior intervention.
Okay. So Mr. Hopkins just testified and he indicated he was a counselor, whereas you are the Dean of Students. So it would be fair to say that you handled discipline, whereas he handled the student advocacy?
Yes,
As of November of 2021, how long have you been in that role?
just about 4 months.
Okay, so you were hired for that school year in the fall of 2021.
Correct.
Now that's part of administration, is that correct?
It's an extension of it, yes.
Okay. Was James Crumbley's son a student in Oxford High School in November of 2021?
Yes.
Prior to November of 2021, did you have any interaction with James Crumbley's son?
I did not know.
I want to direct your attention to what's been admitted as People's 201. This is an email from November the 29th, 2021, 9:32 a.m. And the email reads, "Good morning. I had a student during first hour, defendant's son, who was on his phone looking at different bullets at the end of first hour today as I was walking around the room passing out their essays. I didn't get a chance to investigate it a bit further since it was the end of the hour. Now that he's on my radar, I'm also noticing that some of his previous work that he's completed from earlier in the year leans a bit towards the violent side. I can bring down these things later today during my 5th hour prep if you would like them." So you and Miss Pamela Fine were both on that email?
That is correct.
Okay, and tell us, please, who's Pamela Fine?
So Ms. Fine is the restorative practices coordinator and the anti-bullying coordinator for the school district.
Okay, and tell us a little bit, if you know, what that role entails.
Sure. So restorative care and anti-bullying across the district, she would be working with students to restore situations between two different students, a student and a teacher. It deals a lot with behavior, and so it's more of like, how do you fix or repair the situation? And so she often would collaborate with me on student discipline, and then the anti-bullying programming for the district would be like mentoring kids together to prevent bullying and to report it, when they see it, and it's more of a proactive approach.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you, Miss Fine, and Mr. Hopkins have separate, but sometimes separate roles, but sometimes they intersect.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Now, did you have any interaction with the defendant's son on November the 29th of 2021?
I did not know.
Okay, and tell me what happened after this email was received by you.
So it was received by me when I was in a meeting that morning. So I wasn't made aware of it until after there was a meeting that took place between Ms. Fine, Mr. Hopkins, and the defendant's son.
Okay, so by the time that you had read this email, that situation had already been addressed by Ms. Fine and Mr. Hopkins?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you have any follow-up emails, conversations, or any other interaction regarding the defendant's son or with the defendant's son on Monday, November the 29th?
I did not know.
I'm going to direct your attention now to Tuesday, November the 30th, 2021. This is People's Exhibit 203. This is from a teacher in the school. Email sent Tuesday, November 30th, 2021, 9:32 a.m. It's addressed to you and Mr. Hopkins. Reads, "Here's the photo I took of this paper in case you need it. Signed, Becky." And there's an attachment. Did you receive this email?
Yes, I did.
Okay, tell us about your interactions with either students or administrators prior to receiving this email with regards to the defendant's son.
So I had received this email after I had alerted Mr. Hopkins to the worksheet because this teacher brought a photo of that. to
Okay,
my
let me back
office.
up just a little bit. So before this email was received by you, did you have a conversation with the teacher regarding the defendant's son?
No, I did not.
Okay, so tell me how it is that you became aware of this math worksheet.
So the morning of November 30th, 2021, I was in my office when Miss Morgan, who was the teacher that sent this email, came down to our front office looking for anybody that she could speak with about a student that had drawn some inappropriate things on a worksheet.
And you were there?
I was the only one available at the time, yes.
Okay, and tell me about that interaction, please.
So she entered the threshold of my office door and said she was just looking for somebody to report something. And so I had waved her into my office, and she had stated that there was a student that had drawn some inappropriate things on a worksheet. And then she proceeded to turn her phone around and show me a photo of the said worksheet.
Okay, so this is exhibit 130. Do you recognize this?
I do, yes.
And how do you recognize it?
That's the photo that was on her phone.
Okay. And so she turned her phone around and showed you this?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And tell me what happened next, please.
So I briefly read the statements and looked for a name in the corner and noticed that it was a name of the student that had been in the meeting with Mr. Hopkins and Ms. Fine from the day before.
Okay, so you looked at the worksheet. What stood out to you when you first saw it?
The phrases that were written on there,
Specifically, which ones?
the thoughts won't stop, help me, the world is dead.
Okay. What happened next?
My response to her was, I need to get his counselor. And her response to me was she needed to return to class.
Okay, so she went back to class,
Yes,
and then what did you do?
I walked down to the counseling portion of our front office to alert Mr. Hopkins.
Okay. And tell us about the interaction you had with Mr. Hopkins.
Sure. So when I arrived to his office, before I even mentioned anything, he brought up the defendant's son in sort of a question form. And my response to him was, yes, how did you know? And then he proceeded to share with me that he had received an email that morning regarding that student and thought that that's why I was there at his office. And then I had shared with him that I had just been shown a photo from Miss Morgan.
Okay.
And kind of explained what I had saw on the worksheet. And he immediately stood up from his desk and said, I'll go retrieve him from class.
Okay, so he received a different email the morning of November 30th than the picture
Yes.
that you were shown.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you saw this picture, were you considering this in the realm of student discipline?
Not at all, no.
Okay,
I
so
was more concerned that there was a mental health concern.
is
And
that
so-
why you decided to get his counselor involved?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So after you shared what you learned with Mr. Hopkins, he went and retrieved the student back to his office?
Yes.
Okay, and tell us what happened next, please.
So I waited in Mr. Hopkins' office for him to return with the student, and he came in and sat down and began to kind of talk through what was going on that led him to write those things on his worksheet and draw some characters on there. And the defendant's son repeatedly made sure that we were aware that he understood why we needed to do this and that it made sense and that he understood how bad it looked.
Okay. Did you lead that interaction with the defendant's son, or did Mr. Hopkins?
Mr. Hopkins,
And why is that?
as the school counselor, therefore, looking into a potential mental health concern, that would be his responsibility.
Okay.
Just real quick, just wanted to thank everyone for being here again. And just if you're new to the stream, I try to keep the bottom ticker updated. So if you ever come in late, I try to keep the witness information on that bottom blue ticker.
Did your perspective, based upon the information that you were told, ever change from a mental health lens versus a discipline lens?
It did not, no.
So tell us what happened next after the defendant's son went through the drawing of Mr. Hopkins?
So he had sort of explained that he was interested in video games and that part of those the drawings on there were him trying to get into graphic design, which led into a little bit of a conversation about how there could be potential avenues during his time at Oxford High School to delve into that deeper with some other programs. And then he kind of leaned in more towards the statements that were written on there and talked about how those didn't necessarily explain the video game aspect. And then I listened to the defendant's son speak about him feeling sad lately,
Okay.
which in high school is not that unusual.
Were you involved in the decision to contact the parents of the student?
I was there for it, but Mr. Hopkins had mentioned that we were going to reach out to his parents.
Okay. At some point, did you leave Mr. Hopkins' office?
Yes, that was after we were able to speak with a parent on the phone. And so I left to retrieve the students' belongings since our class periods had changed.
Okay. At that point in time, COVID protocols were still in place?
Yes,
Okay. Did students carry their backpacks with them?
yes,
So you retrieved the defendant's son's backpack from the class that he was in and brought it to Mr. Hopkins' office?
that is correct, yes.
And did this defendant's son stay with Mr. Hopkins until his parents arrived?
Yes.
Were you there in Mr. Hopkins' office the entire time, or did you come back in?
No, I came back in once the parents had arrived for the meeting.
Now, what was your expectation of what was to happen that day after the meeting with the parents?
My understanding and expectation was that, based on the recommendation from the counselor, that the student would be leaving that day, based on prior experiences at schools where parents are called in to talk about student mental health. Typically, they leave when it's suggested that they leave.
With the student?
Yes.
You were there for the, how long, first of all, how long did the entire meeting last between James and Jennifer Crumbley and Mr. Hopkins and yourself?
I was there for 10 minutes of it, and there had been maybe 3 or 4 minutes prior to my arrival.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they waited for me to start or if they had already begun, but I know that I arrived a few minutes after they did, after I was alerted that they had arrived.
So were you there when Mr. Hopkins explained his concerns about the drawing?
Yes.
Now, he just testified, so I don't need you to go through everything he said, but do you recall if James Crumbley said anything?
During the meeting?
Yes.
He did. He expressed concern for his son, that he knew, or he reminded his son that he could always speak to him about stuff, and that he had a journal that he could write stuff in if he was feeling frustrated or going through something.
Now, as a dean of students, when are you permitted to search a student's personal belongings?
So when I have a reasonable suspicion that the student might have something illegal or something that's not allowed at school, and so there needs to be some sort of sign, like a report from somebody. Oftentimes kids will be seen with it, or they'll be showing whatever the things are that they've brought to school they're not supposed to. There needs to be some type of a suspicion or alert that I have that will allow me to do that. And so in this situation, there wasn't something that alerted me that indicated I needed to search.
Okay, and why not?
Nothing that he said, nothing that none of the behavior that he exhibited when I returned with his bag indicated that. There wasn't any suspicion that I had at the time that allowed me to believe that I needed to do that.
At any point, were you informed about the defendant's son's access to weapons?
I was not, no.
Were you given details by either James or Jennifer Crumbley about the words and drawings on this exhibit?
I was not.
Thank you. Beth, for this.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Prior to becoming the Dean of Students at Oxford High School, you worked in various schools and school districts. Is that correct?
Yes,
For most of your career, in fact, you worked with at-risk students.
yes,
Normally, that includes students with some sort of academic or behavioral problems.
yes, that is correct.
In fact, your role at Oxford High School, you testified today, primarily you dealt with the code of conduct,
Yes,
behavioral and academic intervention,
yes,
and issues with attendance.
yes.
You had not had contact with Mr. Crumbley's son until November 30th of 2021.
That's correct.
So, as far as you know, once you became employed by Oxford High School, there were no behavioral issues with Mr. Crumbley's son?
There was not.
No academic issues? No attendance issues?
No.
What do you think of this guy's jacket, Jay?
You learned on November 29th of
Pretty snazzy, Bob.
2021
Pretty snazzy.
that Mr. Crumbley's son was
I
looking
can
at
tell.
bullets on his phone in class.
Yes, that is correct.
But once you had been made aware of it, or once you learned of it, you learned that that had already been handled by Mr. Hopkins and Ms. Fine. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you didn't do anything else with anything that day?
No,
Okay.
I didn't need to do anything further based on the fact that Ms. Fine and Mr. Hopkins did everything that I would have done in that situation.
Okay. So you didn't see any need for additional discipline or any additional intervention or anything like that, correct?
That's correct.
On November 30th of 2021, you were advised by one of Mr. Crumbley's son's teachers that he was writing inappropriate statements on his on a math assignment.
Yes.
You were quickly shown a picture of the assignment on a cell phone, if you recall.
Yes. That's
You
correct.
didn't look at it very well, correct?
No.
You saw that there were drawings,
Yes.
but you didn't see necessarily what all the drawings were. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yes.
You did see the words blood everywhere,
Yes.
but you didn't see much beyond that.
That's correct.
You didn't see help me?
To you, the words on the page were more concerning than the drawings themselves, right?
I would agree with that. Yes.
And that's because sometimes kids in high school draw violent things.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's not abnormal.
That's not abnormal.
You felt that what was on the paper was not appropriate for school, is that correct?
Yep. I would agree with that.
But that it wasn't in and of itself concerning,
Yes.
and that you didn't see it as a threat to anybody.
That is correct.
You didn't see a correlation of violence with the drawings on the paper?
Hey, Sleuthy.
I do not know.
Again, Mr. Crumbley's son had no prior disciplinary history.
He did not.
Bob, my response to you when you asked about the jacket should have been, I wonder if you get a bowl of soup with that, but I
No
missed
prior behavior.
Oh,
He was a pretty average student.
He was. Yes.
He'd only missed one class that year.
Mandy says it looks like a saddle bag.
You said you dealt with attendance, so that's why I was asking.
Sure.
So you're not aware of his
Something
I'm
attendance
not
history?
aware of specific.
Horseback riding.
Okay. He had none of the typical early indicators that there would be an issue of concern other than these isolated incidents from November 29th and November 30th that you were aware of.
So I'm just going to object to the form of the question. Typical indicators. This witness can testify regarding code of conduct and discipline. That's it.
Yeah, but unless he is able to testify about what a typical indicator would be, by his experience.
And I can ask him that, Your Honor. Based on your experience dealing and your education and training with at-risk students and for your position as the Dean of Students, there are what you would consider early indicators of potentially concerning or threatening behavior. Is that fair?
I would say that's a fair statement.
Some of
Yeah,
those
yeah.
include prior disciplinary history,
Yes.
prior bad behavior by the student,
Yes.
issues with grades,
Yes.
issues with attendance.
Yes.
Okay. So knowing all of that, none of those, what I'm calling early indicators, were present other than the two incidents that you were aware of on November 29th and November 30th of 2021.
As far as I was aware, yes.
You sat in on the conversation between Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Crumbley's son on November 30th of 2021.
Yes, I did.
And that was before Mr. Crumbley and his wife got to the school.
That's correct.
Based on the information that you had at that time, you did not believe that Mr. Crumbley's son posed a threat to anyone.
That's a fair statement. Yes.
You were even less concerned after you confirmed some of the information that you'd learned from Mr. Crumbley's son with Mr. Crumbley's wife.
Yes, after she had confirmed all the information he shared with us, my concern from a discipline standpoint was pretty much lowered all the way to none at that point.
Okay.
Oops.
And you said all of the information that he had shared with you. And we've heard some about that, but I just want to confirm. That was about the losses that he'd experienced in 2021, correct? The loss of a family member,
Yes.
the loss of his family dog,
Yes.
a friend had moved away,
Yes.
he'd struggled with COVID,
He did. Yes.
he had a hard time with virtual school.
Yes.
Those were the things that you confirmed with his family, with his parents.
Along with his desire for graphic design and video games, and that they thought he should focus more on academics rather than that, which is what he had shared with us during the meeting.
Okay. When you say he had shared with us, are you referencing a discussion or an argument he had with his parents the night before that related to video game design and grades, or was this something separate?
Both. No, he had shared that he was interested in that and that he didn't feel his parents supported that, and that led to an argument the night before, but he didn't provide any context to that at all, and they had confirmed that, but they also didn't provide any context to that either.
So there was a confirmation that the student and Mr. Crumbley's son and Mr. Crumbley and his wife had an argument with their son the night before. It sounded to you like it may have related to video game design and grades, but you didn't have any context beyond what you believed it to be about.
That's correct. Yes.
Now, obviously, during these meetings, you expect for a student's parents to give you information about things that they are concerned about, correct?
Typically in these meetings, parents come to them and they provide additional context, stuff they're seeing at home, a history of, if, you know, especially in a mental health situation, a history of any kind of counseling, and any issues they've had at other schools or whatever, but they usually provide additional information.
So you said specifically things that they see at home, things that they're concerned about. Obviously, in order for a parent to see something at home or be concerned about it, they have to be aware of it. Is that fair?
Speculation too, Judge.
I don't know how a parent could be concerned if they're not aware of something.
The Dean of Students can't testify as to how a parent would be aware of something at home in a meeting, not even specific to what we're talking about here.
Actually, my question was different, Your Honor. My question was, he would expect that, or it's his belief that if a parent is concerned about something, then they're aware of it.
But then it's a lack of personal knowledge. Mr. Ejack was the Dean of Students in Oxford High School in November of 2021, in charge of discipline and code of conduct issues, Judge. Mr. Hopkins was the counselor. He's already testified.
Okay. I think are you asking him if the parents aren't aware of something, they're not aware of it?
Kind of, Your Honor. Obviously, and I can ask my question differently and see if it makes it a little more simple.
All right.
Mr. Ejack, based on your experience, your education and your training, and just your knowledge in general of you're a human being, if someone doesn't have knowledge of something, they
Your
can't talk about
knowledge
it.
of being a human being.
Does that make sense to you?
Your training experience in being a human being.
So we can't talk about things we don't know about. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Obviously, James Crumbley can't tell you about things he may not be aware of. I'm sorry.
Yes.
You weren't concerned on November 30th of 2021 by Mr. Crumbley's son looking at bullets or drawing guns. Is that fair?
I think there was a level of concern there, which is why we called the parents in for the meeting.
And if you recall, the level of concern was regarding the appropriateness of behavior in school.
Yes.
You didn't find his interest in guns or bullets concerning, especially in the Oxford community, if you remember.
Yes, that's correct.
You've had students draw guns on papers in the past.
Yes, that's correct.
In fact, students in Oxford, not all of them, I'm not saying all students in Oxford, but there are students in Oxford who have guns in their home.
Yes.
You know that there are students in Oxford who handle firearms.
That's a fair judge.
Okay.
Statement.
You would agree that it's not unusual
No, it's not unusual.
in that community.
In that community, yes.
I'm not asking you to speak about any other community, but in that community, it's not unusual for students to handle guns.
That's correct.
When faced with a situation where a student has drawn guns on papers, you typically use your education and training to assess the risk.
As far as a discipline standpoint,
Discipline or otherwise, whatever your role is in that assessment.
yeah, so my role would be to look for any violation of our code of conduct. And so that by itself, the drawings on the worksheet don't violate a code of conduct.
And a violation of the code of conduct would also encompass any sort of a threat to other people. Is that fair?
That's a fair statement.
So as part of your assessment, you're also determining whether or not there's a threat.
I'm determining whether or not I need to alert somebody to something that could potentially be a threat.
And in this situation, you didn't make that alert. Is that fair?
That is correct. There wasn't any information that led me to believe there would be a reason to alert somebody else.
And part of your assessment is, again, looking at those typical early indicators that we talked about, whether there's a history of violence, correct?
That's correct.
A history of discipline,
That is correct.
bullying behavior.
That is correct.
You look at to see if there's a direct threat.
That is correct.
If those things are not apparent, if those things are not present, then it's just a student who drew a gun. Is that accurate?
That's pretty accurate, yes.
You're part of the meeting after Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived. And let me go back a little bit. So you sat in on the meeting between Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Crumbley's son, correct?
That is correct.
If you know, that meeting occurred, lasted approximately 90 minutes.
I don't remember.
Okay. You left that meeting at some point.
Yes.
Then you came back once Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived.
So I left the meeting to retrieve his belongings, the students' belongings, and returned back to the office and then left again until the parents arrived.
Okay. You entered Mr. Hopkins' office after Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived in Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's correct.
You saw that Mr. Crumbley was seated next to his son,
Yes.
which
that's
was
correct.
directly across the desk from Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
It was your perception that Mr. Crumbley was showing care for his son,
Yes.
that he reassured his son that he can always talk to him.
Yes.
You mentioned something on direct with the prosecution about a journal,
Yes.
and you seem to recall that Mr. Crumbley made reference to a journal.
He did. Yes.
You don't recall Mr. Crumbley saying the one that you always keep with you?
I don't recall that. No.
He didn't say anything like the one that's in your backpack,
I don't recall.
specific colors,
I don't remember.
how long he's had it.
I don't remember.
There were no specifics about anything about a potential journal.
Not that I can recall.
So to your knowledge, you don't know if there was one journal or 15 journals. Is that fair?
I can't speak to that. No.
Right. You have no knowledge of that. Is that fair?
Yes.
After meeting with Mr. Crumbley and his wife, you felt that they were receptive of getting their son help, as was suggested by Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
You and Sean Hopkins did not insist that it be done that day. Now, I'm going to clarify because I know that Mr. Hopkins indicated that he preferred that it would be done that day, but neither of you said, you need to take him today and you need to go get him help right now. And if you don't, there's going to be a problem.
What Mr. Hopkins had stated was that they needed to find him some counseling as soon as possible that day, if possible.
And that
And
he was
that he
going,
would be following up within 48 hours to ensure there was something secured for the student.
and that was going to be my next question, that he was going to follow up in a couple of days, 48 hours.
Yes.
And in fact, you didn't feel in that meeting that Mr. Crumbley's son was in need of immediate care based on your education and training and perception and the knowledge that you had in that meeting.
I can't speak to that.
In no way did you feel that Mr. Crumbley was being neglectful of his son.
No, I did not.
You felt that Mr. Crumbley showed the appropriate level of emotion with his son in that meeting.
Objection is, he can't speculate as the appropriate level of emotion. He's the dean of students regarding code of conduct, November of 21. Speculation.
Is there anything odd about his interaction with his son?
I wouldn't say there was anything odd.
Okay.
You also didn't find it strange that Mr. Crumbley and his wife did not take their son home that day because there was no reason for him to go home that day. Is that correct?
As far as the discipline goes, no.
During the meeting, you said that you retrieved Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack from his classroom and brought it back to Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's correct.
You indicated this backpack was heavy.
Yes, such as every other student in the school.
And let me clarify, that day, you didn't say that today. That day, November 30th of 2021, you commented to a teacher that the backpack was heavy.
Yes, I made a joke at how easily she picked it up, and then when she handed it off to me, my arm dropped down. So it was more of a joke at how strong she was compared to myself.
And if you recall, at the time, the students weren't using their lockers,
They were not using that.
so it was fairly common for a student's backpack to be heavy.
That's correct.
You didn't look in the backpack.
I did not know.
You didn't, and I think you said you didn't have reason to look in
I
the
didn't
backpack.
have reasonable suspicion.
You didn't ask Mr. Crumbley's son to look at his backpack.
I did not know.
You did not ask Mr. Crumbley or his wife to look in the backpack.
I did not know.
You didn't look yourself or ask anyone else to look because you didn't feel that there was a reason to look in the backpack. Is that fair?
There was nothing from our conversation or from anything that we had heard so far that would indicate it was enough to reach to that level, correct?
You've had numerous discussions about this case since November 30th of 2021.
Yes.
You've talked with various attorneys.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm not asking you about what your communications were with your own attorneys. I'm not asking about that. I'm just asking if you've met with attorneys.
I've met with many different attorneys.
You've met with the prosecutor's office
Yes.
on more than one occasion.
Yes.
And some of those meetings with the prosecutor's office were to prepare for testimony.
Yes.
Some were to get more information about what occurred on November 30th of 2021.
One was yes.
You learned through some of those meetings that there was no indication that there was a handgun in Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack.
Can you restate that?
Sure. You learned through some of the meetings with the prosecutor's office that there was no indication that there was a handgun in Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack while he was in Mr. Hopkins' office.
Object to the form of the question.
Yeah, what do you mean? Can you just say that?
Yes, I will be more clear. Do you recall testifying in September
What
of
are you referring to, counsel?
There was testimony in September 14th of 2022 that relates to this. If you'd like, we can approach to talk about it.
I think we should.
All right, we're a little behind. Not that much behind.
Yeah.
For folks, what?
So this guy admitted that he didn't even like review the test in full. Dude.
It's just, I mean, that teacher must be. The teacher knew. The teacher took that fucking test, goes down there, like someone's got to take care of this. And these two people, how they took care of it was they called the parents, and the parents knew they bought him a gun. Were like, whatever. And for folks who don't know, it came out last week that James wasn't even signed into DoorDash yet. He signs in after, drives by his house 4 times. Never checks the gun.
Thank you, Your Honor.
After that
As you
meeting.
know, approximately 2 hours after the meeting, after this meeting with Mr. Hopkins, yourself, and Mr. Crumbley and his wife, Mr. Crumbley's son began the shooting.
Yes,
You saw the footage of the shooting.
I did, yes.
You were not aware that Mr. Crumbley's son was the shooter
Initially.
at the time.
When I saw all of the footage,
No, let me go back. So at some point early on the day of the shooting, you saw footage of the shooting.
yes.
And that was while you were in the office of the school.
On the phone with the 911 operator?
Yes. And at that point, the thought didn't cross your mind that the shooter may be Mr. Crumbley's son.
That's a fair statement, yes.
In fact, you didn't know that it was Mr. Crumbley's son until you were
What?
told that it was him after the shooting.
I believe.
Oh, they're so full of shit. Are you kidding me?
As the video footage continued to play and we were still on the phone, it wasn't confirmed, but I had a pretty good idea that that's who it was.
Okay. Even looking back, after you know what Mr. Crumbley's son did, 2 hours after that
Dude,
meeting, his
tone
behaviors
deaf,
did not
man.
show a pattern of what he
Or
was
just
planning to
completely
do
full
2
of
hours
shit.
later.
Based on the information I knew, no.
It's fair to say that you have years of experience with at-risk students.
Yes, that's correct.
Years of experience with behavioral, academic, attendance, issues of that nature.
Yes,
You have education and training about concerning things to look for in students.
yes,
You knew that Mr. Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone on November 29th of 2021.
yes,
You knew that he had drawn a gun and some concerning words on his math assignment.
yeah, that's correct.
You knew that he was at the shooting range with his mom the weekend before.
Yes, that's correct.
You confirmed that during the meeting with his parents, correct?
Yes,
You knew that he had experienced significant losses in the months before November 30th of 2021.
yes,
You knew that Mr. Hopkins was recommending that his parents have him talk to a therapist that day if possible.
that's correct.
You knew that his backpack was heavy and commented about the weight of it to a teacher.
That's correct.
Man.
You knew that firearms were not uncommon in homes in Oxford.
That's correct.
You knew that students at the high school handled firearms and that it wasn't uncommon.
We're asked and answered numbers.
You knew,
Yeah, he answered that.
you knew that the shooter was going to stay in school that day.
At the end of the meeting?
Yes,
Yes,
partly because he wanted to
yes,
and partly because his parents had to go to work.
that's what I was told, yes.
And with all of this, all of the knowledge that you had on November 30th of 2021 at approximately 10:52 a.m., you did not feel that he was a threat to anyone, and you didn't feel that you had reasonable suspicion to look at his backpack.
No, because you have to remember, I knew very little of what we all know today. So when we're looking at the big picture today, I knew a fraction of what we all know now.
And we talked about this a little bit with Mr. Hopkins as well.
You had the test
We
in
all
your
know it
hand,
happened at
dude.
12:51 on November 30th of 2020.
No.
But the information that you had at 10:52 a.m. or approximately 10:50 a.m. when that meeting ended is the information that you were going on.
Yes, and that does not rise to the level of suspension or a discipline, especially when you're considering mental health.
And it doesn't,
That supersedes any type of minor discipline or behavior violation.
so, and Mr. Hopkins talked about this a little bit. Looking in hindsight, there was more information.
Yes, we now know there's a lot more information.
You might look at things differently looking in hindsight.
I would 100% look at things differently.
But the information that you had on that day, at that time, is what led you to make the decisions that you made and feel the way that you felt about the situation that you were presented with in Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's a fair statement, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Briefly. Mr. Ejack, let's talk about the information not shared with you at 10:52 a.m. on November 30th, 2021. Okay, so you formed your belief that you did not have the requisite level of suspicion to search the shooter's backpack based upon what you were told. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Phoenix, the day
James
before,
Crumbley
when he
tells
was
you
searching
that he
bullets,
had bought his
he
son a
told the
6-hour
teacher that
9mm firearm 4 days before that
they bought him
meeting.
a gun and he went shooting over the weekend.
Did anybody, either his son or his wife, tell you that?
No.
Did his son tell you that, or did James Crumbley tell you that his son had been begging for a 9mm handgun?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that he actually got him a different firearm in June of 2021?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that the details and severity of his son's friend being taken from him at the beginning of the month?
No.
Now, you indicated that as far as a discipline standpoint, your belief was that the mental health concerns would override.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So when you have a student who is being seen for mental health, and there also are some minor violations, this being a second day of insubordination, essentially, the mental health concern is what takes precedence because you want to build that relationship with the student and let them know that it's a safe space, and you don't want to follow it up with some kind of a negative interaction, such as a discipline.
Is that one of the reasons why Mr. Hopkins led the meeting?
Yes.
Did your lens ever change from mental health to discipline?
It never did, no.
And is that based upon the information that you learned that day?
Yes.
Did James Crumbley ever tell you that the 6-hour 9mm handgun that he bought for his son was kept unlocked in the home?
No.
You were asked about certain indicators in your experience when you consider discipline. Is access to an unlocked firearm, is that an indicator?
Yes.
Is that something to consider? Had you known that?
It would be something to consider.
Okay, but that information was not shared with you.
No, it was not.
But just so we're clear, sir, the information that you and Mr. Hopkins were told on November the 30th, that information wasn't shared with anybody else in administration. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Very brief request, Your Honor. Very brief.
Were you handed the math test,
Mr.
sir?
Ejack, you don't know whether James Crumbley knew that his son had access to a firearm that was in the home. Is that correct? You don't know whether James Crumbley knew.
So the question was he told that?
I don't know how he would know what the defendant knew.
He
Unless
testified
he was told.
what he was not told, Judge. That was the question.
Yeah, he said he wasn't told, but I don't know how he would know what your client knew unless he had a conversation about that.
Thank you. You don't know whether Mr. Crumbley's son had expressed any sadness over his friend moving to his parents, based on the information that you had on November 30th.
Can you say?
Yes, it was kind of a
Are you
convoluted
asking
question.
whether it was discussed in that meeting or?
Whether Mr. Ejack knew that Mr. Crumbley's son had expressed any of this sadness that they had identified to his parents prior to that meeting. Do you know if he did?
I'm not sure what you're trying to ask. I'm sorry.
Yes. Do you know if James Crumbley was aware of this sadness that you all had identified during this meeting with Mr. Hopkins?
I do not know.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Was the information that was shared from Sean Hopkins regarding the emails that he received?
Yes.
Okay. And he went through the drawing with James and Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes.
And at no point did James or Jennifer Crumbley ever say that the firearm purchased 4 days before mirrors the firearm drawn on that math worksheet?
They did not.
They did not.
Or you can step down and excuse. Your lunch is in. Okay, this slide is wrong, obviously. If I were taller, it would have been fixed already. I'm going to ask you to return at 1 o'clock. It's not about 5 to 12. I'm going to ask you to return at 1 o'clock. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you not to discuss the case with each other.
All right. Hey, everybody in the chat, play nice. Play nice. pretty easy to do. We like to keep it cool in here. You know, we know
Yeah,
it's we know it's heated. It's a heated issue. Both sides, you're allowed to think whatever you want to think. Just be cool, be civil, be nice. Use your words. Don't name call. Just stay classy. You know,
For
stay
folks
classy.
who are not on Eastern Standard Time, we got like 1 hour and 5 minutes before we're back. I will when I end the stream, I will set up the afternoon sesh. You in for that, Bob? For the
100%, dude.
all right, excellent. Any
Streaming
thoughts?
this thing with you? Yeah, you know what surprises me with this is that it's really more in relation to the civil lawsuit. When the dean of students, the guy who would have had the authority to say take your kid out of school or suspend him or do whatever, admits on the stand right here that when he was handed the math test, he didn't look at it thoroughly. You know, I mean, man, like that math test is everything. Like that in and of itself probably should have pierced, you know, the governmental immunity. Because if there's gross negligence, which I would consider that to be, you know, I mean, how do you not, when you're handed that thing, how do you not look at it thoroughly?
That's your job. That's why the teacher brought it to you.
Dude, it's like entirely your job. You know, it's like that's stunning to me. So and you know, I saw some comments in the chat. Again, to me, the case hinges on that math test. You know, there's a lot of back and forth about what the Crumleys knew or should have known or didn't know or what they were told or what they weren't told. At the end of the day, what makes the Crumbleys 100% criminally liable, in my estimation, is the fact that they were handed that math test that said, help me. I can't stop the thoughts. Blood everywhere. It's like you just cannot leave your kid in school under those circumstances ever. That's it, period. They're like nothing beyond that matters to me. Like that test is everything in this case. Like I said, in a world where that test doesn't exist, I'm probably not holding the Crumbleys liable based on the evidence that I've heard. Just because of the fact that, you know, those of us with kids who have had teenagers and you just know how they are, you know, they don't want us in their shit. They spend a lot of time in their rooms. You know, they're going through it. They're going through puberty and just the trials and tribulations and traumas that come along with being a teenager and first love and, you know, no love, whatever the case may be, friends, whatever they're going through. It's hard being a teenager. It's hard learning how to be a human being. And they're not necessarily open to sharing with us as parents. They don't think that we know shit. They don't understand. You know, it's like we all have the conversations with our kids about, you know, I went through this. Trust me. You know, I know what I'm talking about. They're not hearing us typically. So in terms of what they may or may not have known, and obviously had they gotten to the point where they're sneaking around in his room and they run into his journal, obviously we're talking about I would assume, much different situation. I mean, the journal was shocking to the conscience. If you look at it, it was unbelievable. You know, I mean, it couldn't have been more clear what his intent was from that, you know, but like me and Allison personally, we don't, you know, we treat our kids as just small humans. They don't have lessened rights, you know, human rights in our house. You know, we give them grace. We give them privacy. You know, we don't, you know, obviously, you know, we have Life 360, so I know where the hell they're at all the time. I track my kids, you know, but in terms of like scanning through their messages and, you know, digging through their rooms and trying to find diaries or journals. I mean, we just don't do that because I wouldn't want anybody to do that with me, you know? And I think that just because they're children doesn't mean they shouldn't have, especially teenagers, you know, little kids, it's different, but when they're teenagers and they're going through it all, man, you know, it's hard, you know, but then again, like I've said, Jay, if my kid is exhibiting anything that I feel is off, I'm addressing it immediately, but I'm vigilant with that, like I care that my kid is happy and well adjusted, and I'm aware, like immediately, like if Cameron, my 17-year-old, walks in the room, I can sense immediately if something is wrong, always, like without fail, and I'll be like, what's up? She'll be like, nothing. And I'm like, what's up? Talk to me, and it's just, but not every parent does that, I guess. Why? I don't know. I don't know why you'd bring human beings into this world and neglect them and not give a shit what's going on with them. It's weird to me. So at the end of the day, considering all of that, if this case existed without that math test that morning, I'm probably feeling differently about this because, again, as I said with the Jennifer Crumbley trial, this is changing the way that parents are going to be treated by law enforcement, prosecutor's office, all over the country, not just in Michigan, everywhere. Every prosecutor's office is going to be looking at these school shooting cases, and now they're going to start digging. They're going, like, they have upped the game for parents in terms of, we should know what the fuck is going on with our kids, and I'm good with that. I just am, So yeah, I don't know, man. It's I think at the end of the day, we're going to get the same result as Jennifer here. And again, we're talking about two different things. The school is absolutely at blame here, but I blame no one more than I blame Jennifer and James Crumbley. Ultimately that was their call. Like I said a million times during Jennifer's trial when I was streaming, and I'm like, I don't give a shit what the teacher or the counselor or the dean would have been saying to me. It would have made zero difference to me if they were saying, no, it's fine, just keep it in school. I'd be like, dude, get the fuck out of here. I'm like, come on, let's go talk. What's going on? I'm having a conversation with my kid immediately, and period. And, and I'm saving my kid's life, and I'm saving all those students who lost their lives unnecessarily, just by doing that, and it doesn't take much to do that. It doesn't take much to talk to your kid and to try to figure out what's going on. And if they're resistant, then I'm threatening. I'm saying, look, you can either talk to me, or I'm bringing you to a professional to have them talk to you, or I'm doing both, one way or another. Like I talk turkey with my kids, I don't treat them like as if they're anything other than a human being, like they're going to know what's up, and, I'm going to make it abundantly clear to them, and it's just, we live in a world that we can't decide not to pay attention to our kids anymore. Like those days are long gone. When you and I were young, Jay, I could tell my mom, oh, I'm going out, I'm going to go ride my bike, be home by dark.
Once the lights go on, you better be,
That
once
was
the street lights go, do what you got to do.
That was it. And we don't live in that world, not even close anymore. Like we need to keep track of our kids. There's too much bad out there, for us not to be paying attention. And, when they're under your roof, and if you're choosing to ignore what's going on with them, and then something like this happens, I'm sorry, but, you're the last line of defense as the parent. It's your duty as a parent to be aware of what's going on in your kids' lives. So, yeah, I think it's like I said, man, these are huge cases moving forward. And I'll tell you what, if these cases have a chilling effect on, and to the extent where it stops a school shooting from happening down the road, because people are like, oh man, shit, I better pay attention to what my kid's doing a little more, better pull my ass out of my phone and pay attention to my kids, maybe have a dinner at a dinner table once a week and discuss, see how things are going, whatever you need to do to be a part of your kid's life.
Or at the very
you know,
least, you get a call from your fucking school. You take it serious, like that. Like if you get a call, you got to drive down to the school. You're like, oh, maybe if I bought. These details. They bought them the gun. They see but just generally speaking, get a call from the fucking school that like there's counselors and teachers who are like, you got to take it. Like you take that fucking seriously. You take
dude,
it
somebody
seriously.
puts that fucking paper in your hand, man.
Well, yeah,
Dude, like
there's just so much against it.
Yeah, I see you. Yeah, there are two versions of the test, but what we know is that Jennifer Crumbley was emailed the original. So, and you can read. I've seen the scratched out version. It doesn't take. You don't have to be a trained spy to read what it said that he scribbled out. You know what I'm saying? He scribbled it out with pencil. So this, and we also know that the counselor, because the counselor. He admitted that he could read what the word said, even though it was scribbled out. So, the problem with this dean is he just didn't look. He gave it a cursory glance and then tossed it aside and thought it was no big fucking deal. Well, now he's got the blood of these kids on his hands that he's got to live with for the rest of his life because he didn't do his job at all in any capacity. So, yeah, dude, look, those kids, the victims, were failed by everybody, starting with the Crumbleys, continuing on to the school. And, Ethan is much of a monster as he was. That kid was failed miserably by everybody in his life. Everybody. It's like, it's weird to feel sympathy for a kid like that. But I do. I just do. The kid was screaming for help. Screaming. There is no world in which he did not know that test was going to be turned into a teacher and that test was going to result in he knew because they had just called his mother and his parents about the bullets, him looking up bullets on a phone. So he knew that the test was if he wanted to just, he could have brought his journal if he was just trying to keep everything in. That was an absolute cry for help, begging somebody to stop him from what he was about to do. Begging. Like at some point we should probably watch that Miller hearing, man. Like it's like, that's where everything comes out, Jay. That Miller hearing, dude, will blow your mind. It just where this kid's mindset was, and like even more shockingly coming out of that. And just so you all know, like a Miller hearing, there was a Supreme Court case back in 2012 wherein the issue was brought up of kids that are under the age of majority, under the age of 18, whether or not they could be sentenced to prison without the possibility of parole. And the Miller hearing, and so they, in that case, they said not without a hearing, that there has to be a hearing, and they have to determine whether or not that kid was mature enough mentally, whether there's any kind of mental illness going on. They have to look at multiple factors before they can do that. And, they went to that hearing, and shockingly to me, that kid was found not to have any kind of mental defect. And I'm like, if you can read that journal and not think that kid has some kind of severe mental disease or defect going on, I don't know what you need to be putting in writing in order for somebody to think that you've got an issue. He still has never received any treatment to this day. That kid's now sitting in a prison, like just rotting mentally, and it's like, I don't know, man. It's a super sad case all around. It's just a devastating case in so many different ways. That's why I think it's such an important case. I'm glad we're streaming it together, man, because
Yeah, me too.
It's a rough one. It's different. It's different than the typical shit that we stream. It's like in those cases,
it's gonna have an effect.
It is
in this country.
Huge, man. I mean, it's gonna change and trust me when I say this, it's going to change how parents are dealt with by law enforcement and prosecutors' offices. It's just going to. This is going to become the norm. This is going to become a situation where the prosecutors' offices will be subpoenaing our phones. If God forbid your kid goes off and does some shit like this, you are going to be probed. Your life is going to be probed. They are going to be looking into either your lack of parenting or your disregard of what was going on in your kid's life. And if it reaches the level of willful disregard, just like not giving a shit, you're going down. And frankly, I think you should. I really do. I really, really do. And this isn't like, your kid's getting in a school fight. This is a whole different beast. This isn't like you're going down if your kid shoplifts. This isn't that. This is if your kid has gotten to the point in their life where they are driven to do something of this magnitude and you were fucking oblivious to it, you're on the hook. And you should be. That's my opinion on it, and no one's ever going to change it. And people can have different opinions,
In this case, not only oblivious, aiding and abetting. You're buying the fucking kid a gun. You're going to the store and getting the kid a gun. He couldn't have bought it himself. You are aiding him. It's just. But if I just want to bring up the point, if folks didn't watch the trial list, this is going so fast. They revealed on Friday, they didn't think it was going to go so fast. Maybe because they were not ready for the speed talking defense attorney, and they were used to this case may end on Wednesday, folks. It may be out to the jury on Thursday. So just a heads up if folks were not here last week.
That's crazy. Hey, before you cut it, yeah, Nosy, thank you for that $5 holla, by the way. And I did. I actually was looking up Chippewa while the testimony was going on. And Jay, what Nosy Rosie is talking about is that there was and recently, like this is back in February of this year, up in Chippewa Falls, the school basically covered up the fact that they found like a Columbine type manifesto by a student. They were able to thwart it, so the school shooting didn't happen, but the school felt that they didn't have a responsibility to the community to let the community know that this thing was in existence, this manifesto. They hid it from the entire community. And wow. I think that's bullshit. I think that the community, I think that the parents in that community, I think everybody had a right to know. So yeah, I have been, I checked that out, Nosy. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. I appreciate it.
And this is a great point by Kimmy's Bleshy. And thank you so much, Kimmy's, for the super chat. I wonder if Ethan thought, I'm going to give them all the red flags if they don't stop me or find the gun in my backpack, that I'm going to do this. What more? I mean, really, what more did he have to do? Handing in that test, the call, searching the bullets, looking up stuff. Like, what more could he have done to
100%, Kimmy.
Great point.
Yeah, and I think you would type something like a comment, and I agree completely. I think that was exactly what he was thinking. We don't know at this point whether or not, and I don't anticipate that James is going to testify, but he might. I mean, maybe he will. I mean, it didn't go well for his wife.
Did you hear what happened, by the way, to him last week? Did you hear? Mm-mm. Oh, so all of a sudden it gets to, I don't know if I don't remember, I think it was the first day or the second day. Anyway, it gets to the end of the trial, and all of a sudden the head district attorney, who's not doing it, I forget his name, he comes in, and they're all of a sudden they're talking about they're talking about this motion, but they don't want to say it. It's very clear they don't want to talk about it. And the judge is like, well, there's going to be an article that comes out in 15 minutes about this. So we have to do something about it. And then the defense attorney and the district attorney, they go in the back, and then they come out, and basically it's revealed that later the next day, but that James Crumbley had been threatening someone, we don't know who, been sending threatening messages to someone out there, while he's in jail. So they basically resolved that he can only talk to clergy, his attorney, and research the case. But he apparently was sending threatening messages from jail
from his tablet. From
I
they
guess
get
so.
Tablets. Most jails have these tablets. What kind of threatening messages?
We don't know. They just said they won't. They don't say who. We're thinking maybe a journalist or something. If there's because they mentioned this is going to be an article, but no one's that I've seen has revealed who he's sending messages to,
Huh.
but he's only allowed now communication with his attorney, clergy, and to research the case, basically.
No shit. Oh, so Kimmy, but like what I was saying, so we don't really know because there's been a lot of evidence that's been put forth that, Ethan had sent, and Jay told me that this came in on Friday, that, Ethan had been sending his buddy messages that, yeah, I've been going to my parents and asking them to help me. Like I'm having these fucked up thoughts and they're ignoring me. Whether or not him saying that to his friend doesn't mean that it actually happened. So I don't know if there's been any evidence that shows that Ethan, which, and if it was a conversation that had taken place, then there's never going to be any evidence of it. Whether or not it actually made its way from Ethan's mouth to his parents' ears, but if that's the case, if that's true, then yeah, I think that absolutely the kid was begging to be stopped. Like with Gacy, and they didn't find that he was insane, but my dad's argument in that case was that he was compelled. It wasn't like a choice that he was able to make mentally in terms of killing these kids. It was just like that's what his mind was that's where his mind was, and I have a feeling that Ethan was in the same place mentally. And when he just said, when he did everything that I think that he felt that he could do in that moment to have somebody thwart him. It's just, and nobody did. Like that kid must have been sitting there like, these fucking idiots. Like they're seriously gonna let me go back into the school, these fucking idiots. Knowing, like, he's sitting there in that meeting planning exactly what he's going to do, probably half paying attention. He's like, these fucking idiots didn't even open my backpack. And then, we know what the end result was. So yeah, I think so, Kimmy. I agree with you completely. And there was one other thing I wanted to answer here, Jay. I saw.
Well, I don't know if you saw Jen gifted out 10.
Oh, Jen, an always giver, just a beautiful human being. Aw, family hug. Love that. Thank you so much, Jen. And I'm sure everybody who was gifted memberships is equally thankful to you, Jen. You're amazing. So thankful to you. Wait, there was a good question here, Jay. I want to see it. It was under. Bear with me, just for a second. Let me see, y'all. Hold on. You guys have been very active in the chat, so I have to really kind of scroll through here. It was good though. Oh, okay. So Lamam James at Defense Diaries, curious what efforts would be enough to demonstrate that you weren't negligent. Where would that line be drawn? And that's a great question. And a lot of the resistance that I was getting when I was streaming Jennifer's trial, people are like, oh no, you're gonna be, every parent's gonna be fucking blamed for everything. I'm like, no, it's gonna be a case-by-case situation. Like I said, you're not gonna be held responsible criminally if your kid shoplifts or if your kid gets in a school fight. Those are different. If other people lose their lives because of your kid's actions and they can show that you knew or should have known what was going on with your kid, it's going to be a case-by-case thing. There's not going to be like a bright line rule in terms of, and that's how negligence always goes. Like you have trials for negligence. Like if you're talking about like a civil case, like car accident cases, like those are accidents. Nobody's, purposefully getting into car accidents. And those trials, when it goes to trial, if somebody's either killed or severely injured, and those things go to trial, that's what they're determining at trial is the negligence. Were you negligent? So, and that's what we're doing here. Remember, with involuntary manslaughter, there is no intent. Okay. Meaning that, the state doesn't have to prove intent or malice aforethought. Like that's a murder charge, murder in the first, murder in the second, even voluntary there's some semblance of intent there. With involuntary, intent is not the issue. It's willful neglect, and that's what they're trying to show here. And they're trying to establish, the state that, look, this is all the signs. These are all the red flags they had. And the defense is trying to say, well, you're saying that they're red flags, but the school wasn't really letting the parents know, so the defense in this case is really trying to blame shift over to the school, and just saying, well, the school didn't even think it was a big deal. And now we're showing you by way of testimony that the school didn't think that it was a big deal. You heard it from the counselor. You heard it from the dean, who didn't even think enough to look carefully at the test. How can you expect the parents to know? And obviously, the counter to that will, of course, be the math test. And again, the math test changes the dynamic of this case completely, because when your kid's writing in all bold, help me, what else do you need to see? What else do you need to see? Jay, does help me have another meaning that I'm missing? Is there
Not that I'm aware
am I
of.
misconstruing what help me can mean? Is there a different meaning to that other than help me? If somebody hands me, anybody, even if it's not my kid, if somebody hands me a note that says fucking help me, I'm going to figure out what that person needs, because they clearly need help. I don't know, man. To me, this thing is open and shut. But I mean, we'll see how it goes. But that being said, I think that Crumbley's attorney, what's her first name, Jay? Do you know?
I don't know her name.
I missed it either, but she's doing a hell of a job.
I thought so too. I think she's doing a great job.
She's very effective, and ultimately she's got a tough case because of the math test. There's no way to get around that math test. That math test is everything. That math test is just shy of had he had the journal in there and the teacher grabbed the journal. The journal is next level crazy in terms of where Ethan was mentally. But the math test is right there, and it's a cry for help. If you're a parent and you are handed that and your kid's literally crying for help and you choose to ignore it, I got news for you. You deserve to go to prison. If your kid ends up doing something horrific, beyond imagination, just changing the arc of thousands of people's lives. Those 4 kids losing their lives didn't just affect the parents. It affected everybody in that community. I mean, you saw it with the first witness they put on the stand, that poor woman. She's going to live with that scar and those scars and that trauma for the rest of her life. Everybody in that community is going to live with those scars and that loss for the rest of their lives. Yeah, Diz, I do think that James saw the math test. They had the math test in there. There's no way, even if he didn't, and his wife calls him and tells him about the math test, if he doesn't ask to see it, it's even worse. So there's no excuse for James Crumbley. I don't give a shit if he was handed the test or not. When she calls him and says, you need to get your ass to the school, there's an issue with Ethan. If Allison's calling me, telling me that, I'm like, well, what the fuck does the thing say? What's it say? She's like, hold on, I'm trying to pull it up and pull the fuck over and tell me what, you know what I mean? It's like, what does it say? And she's reading it to me and I'm like, oh my fucking God. And, and I'm getting pulled over by the police because I'm doing 150 on the way to the school. I'm like, I did the school. It's like, there's no excuse. There's no excuse. There is no talking your way out of it. I mean, it's just like, what does a normal person do under those circumstances? In any parent,
a prudent man, if you will, Bob.
The prudent man. That is correct. Very good, Jay. I'm proud of you.
Don't worry about it. I know a little bit.
You know a little bit.
I know a little bit of negligence, a little bit about the negligence.
Indeed you do, my insurance friend. All right, let's take lunch, and we love you all. Thanks for hanging, and come hang with us when we come back.
Yeah, like 30 minutes, folks. Actually, I have this stream portal to it, and I'll send it to Bob. It'll be on Bob's too. So again, if you're not, thanks everyone for being here. And if you're not subscribed to Bob and mine, subscribe and vice versa. Thank you all. And we'll be back in like 35 minutes, guys.
Love y'all.
Love you.